The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are served from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Daring Democracy by Francis Moore Lepay and Adam Eichen. This is from Chapter 1, What Will It Take? It's far too late and things are far too bad for pessimism, wrote author D. Hock in 1999, and we cheer in agreement. Yet we also know that in this treacherous time, it's really, really tough to stay true to this wise insight, and that's why we wrote this book. It's our way to find focus, energy, and honest hope. What has helped a lot is one realization. Despite the repeated refrain to the contrary, Americans are not fundamentally a divided people. In the 2016 election, what drew many to Donald Trump was his pledge to side with regular folks against the elite populating the swamp. At the same time, one thing repelled many people from him was fear that he would instead fill the swamp, accelerating the corporate takeover of our democracy. Our point is that Americans who are typically portrayed as being far apart were actually seeking a similar change. In fact, poll after poll shows striking common ground in our values as well as our vision of the democracy we want. With one big exception, surveys of the super rich show a huge chasm between their hopes for our country's direction and that of the rest of us. Our book is about building on what most of us share so that we can transform fear into action together. Action strong enough to get at the very roots of our historic crisis, that of the degradation and assault on democracy itself. In our opening note, we recounted a bit of our separate journeys leading to our initial encounter in 2015 at the first global conference on money and politics in Mexico City. There we found ourselves surrounded by multitudes gathered from dozens of countries, all devoting their lives to one shared insight. Democracy is not a choice. Creating democracies truly accountable to their citizens is essential to our very survival, to the flourishing of societies supporting human life, and now, because of climate change, to the survival of the earth as we've inherited it. This is a colossal claim, we know, but there's one point in which human history makes us absolutely certain. It's not the magnitude of a challenge that crushes the human spirit. At our founding, farmers, shopkeepers, laborers, and slaves defeated an empire. Since then, black Americans risked their lives to fight against the subjugation of slavery and then for their democratic rights. Women fought for 7 decades to secure suffrage. In the 1930s, a democratic upsurge by workers led to the New Deal, which added basic protections of human dignity in the workplace and in old age. For millions, though, the promise of democracy remained unfulfilled. Soon thereafter, McCarthyism's witch hunts again dimmed our democracy, but brave Americans fought back. And by the 1960s, we began stepping up to halt an unwise war, demand civil rights protections, and embrace a war on poverty that by the early 70s had cut the poverty rate almost in half, lightning speed compared with the pace of most social change. Confronted with that which appears to be impossible, time and again, humanity has embraced the challenge with gusto, grit, and ultimately triumph. No, it's not a huge challenge that kills the spirit. What most defeats us is feeling useless, that we have nothing to say, nothing to contribute, that we don't count. A sense of futility is what destroys us. And it's precisely that emotional plague that today afflicts too many Americans across all political lines. Through our long social evolution, we humans have evolved as doers. We are problem solvers. If we were content to be whiners and couch potatoes, no doubt we could never have accomplished any of the human culture's vast achievements. Right now, though, many of us are filled with uncertainty about what to do. just as we most need all hands on deck. So we wrote this book in part to help ourselves and others to rethink core assumptions that disempower us, specifically about the meaning and power of democracy. Often we hear that seeing is believing, but for humans in many ways it's the other way around. Believing is seeing. No less than Albert Einstein explained, it is theory which decides what can be observed. If we do not believe in the possibility of genuine democracy, we will not be able to see signs of it emerging. So it's become ever clearer to us that the possibility of creating a flourishing democratic society rests on whether enough Americans believe that it's achievable. Certainly we do. Yet to take on any mammoth undertaking, a belief in possibility is but one ingredient. To jump in wholeheartedly, most of us also need to feel in our bones that success is essential and that there's a way for us to make a real difference. Applied to democracy, success depends, therefore, on whether we can embrace three simple but powerful ideas. One, to fulfill every public need and to advance every public good, democracy is essential. None of our deepest needs can be served, nor are opportunities or threats met without it. Two, genuine democracy is possible. Here we mean real democracy, accountable to the people, not to narrow private interests. And three, there is a rewarding, even exhilarating role for each of us in making democracy real. As we will show in this book, a bipartisan democracy movement is emerging that's not about dutiful do-gooding. It meets deep emotional needs, and maybe it's even what our founders meant by our right to the pursuit of happiness. These core tenets are not taken on faith. They become real for us as we've continually tested them against our lived experiences and in our ongoing study. In this book, we hope you will become a believer as well. When we assert that democracy is essential, we mean that it's not just a good thing. It's the only approach to governance that brings forth the best of who we are. It's a great book, Daring Democracy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Friday, and we will get to Anything Goes Friday. But first, Congressman Pocan was unable to be with us on his usual Monday slot for Middays with Mark. So he's here with us today. Congressman Pocan, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here. Sorry Wednesday didn't work out this week.
That's quite all right. Glad to have you with us. And I should add your website, pocan.house.gov, and your Twitter handle is rep, as in Representative REP, Rep Mark Pocan. So what's at the top of your list of things that we need to know about this week?
Man, it was a week, Tom. There was a lot going on, from Trump pulling our country out of the Iranian nuclear deal, huge issue, and again, just changing our status around the globe, and again, changing, I think, some of the power balances in various regions because of a bad decision. It seemed to be based more on if Barack Obama did it, therefore I've got to get rid of it. I think amazing information about Michael Cohen getting money from companies like AT&T and Novartis and other companies. This huge amount of money. That is going to be a story for a while until we figure out exactly what they were buying and how it all worked and where the money went. Watching Mike Pence say that we should end the Russia probe, being more than the loyal soldier, and George Will going pretty aggressively after him for being such a lapdog to the president. And it just kind of goes on, and then there's things pending for next week. So it's a busy time, and I'm sure callers have a lot of issues they might want to talk about, but it's been a very, very busy week.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And in fact, we've got a few callers on the line already here, but our Congressman Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Our number 202-808-9925. And Brian in Lindenhurst, New York, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman Pocan. How are you today?
Hey, very good, Brian. Thank you.
Great. I just I wanted to call in because Tom knows a lot about the Constitution, and I just wanted to. U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 4. It says the President, the Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. It seems like Mr. Trump is trying to tick all three of those boxes, if you ask me. But what exactly does civil officers entail?
I I don't know if I have that information offhand, Brian. I'm not sure if I have an answer for that. If I can answer it a little bit more globally, and then maybe Tom, if he's got some info on that. But what we're watching on the impeachment side, by and large, I think the answer that Democrats have been saying is, we're waiting to see where this Mueller investigation officially goes, because as much as many of us already find multiple places that we think there have been arguable cases where we could bring up impeachment, the majority of Congress is Republican, the majority of the Senate is Republican, and it's not likely to happen unless we really have done our homework in every possible way. And for many of us, that's the Mueller investigation, and it's proceeding very well. The fact they're trying to stop it along the way. I thought this week most interesting, both Brian and Tom, is that, when they started coming out and saying how it's going on forever. Well, interesting statistics. Benghazi investigation, 4 years, 0 indictments. The Clinton email investigation went for a couple years, 0 indictments. We're 14 months in on the Mueller investigation, and there's 23 indictments. So what they're saying is so far from the truth. And again, the public is way smarter than they think the public is on this, but it just shows that this has got the potential that if there is going to be impeachable offenses, likely the Mueller investigation will be the best place for us to get the votes we need to do that.
Yeah, and I didn't study this in school, but my guess is that Article 2, Section 4, reference to civil people basically means that this doesn't apply to the military. The military is not subject to impeachment. That people who are appointed or elected can be subject to impeachment, but not members of the military. They have their own whole set of under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and all that, their own whole set of ways that they're dealt with. But that's just a guess, but I think that's probably right. Anyhow, Terry in Chicago. Hey, Terry, your thoughts? I'm sorry, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello?
Hi, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Tom. I was just rethinking your old book of the crash of 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And you had mentioned a few months ago about the plunge protection that they have in place. And truly, the way money is created, I read a book called Making the Banks.
Terry, do you have a question for Congressman Pocan?
Every time there's a loan, they create more money. So now they have thousands of trillions of dollars.
Hello, Terry. Terry?
Yes?
Do you have a question for Congressman Pocan?
Congress. Same as I had for your other congressman. Will he vote for House Resolution 1144, which is a tax on LaSalle Street and Wall Street? That's my question, actually, and it would help.
Thank you, Terry.
Behavior.
Congressman?
Yeah, Terry, we have about 5,800 plus bills introduced, because I just introduced one this week with Bernie Sanders, and I'm making it easier for people to organize unions. I would need to know a little more about what 1144 is. I just don't have.
I think it's
memorized.
Bringing back the STET tax, the Securities Transaction Excise Tax, the small tax on individual security trades.
Oh, and this is, I think, essentially what we've put in our Progressive Caucus version of a budget every cycle as a way to do that. I know the European Union does it. We've talked about doing it. I believe it brings in about $1 trillion a year if it's the same one. We've been a proponent of that.
Yeah. Patricia in Tuxedo Park, New York. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. I have a question for the congressman. Last night I heard on MSNBC that Paul Ryan picked up a $30 million check for the Republicans, and I was wondering how much he thinks that influenced Trump's decision about getting out of the Iran deal.
Yeah, in fact, Congressman, I tweeted this morning saying that I think that Spanky's president, I'm referring to Trump these days as Spanky because he famously asked Stormy Daniels to spank him with a copy of Forbes magazine with this picture on the cover. And he dropped trow and let her do it, apparently, at least according to her. But in any case, the Spanky's presidency really is all about pay to play. Novartis puts in money, and they want Trump not to negotiate Medicare D prices, which he had campaigned on. Now he's going to announce today, or Monday, I'm not sure when the announcement's coming, that he's not going to negotiate Medicare prices. AT&T wanted to end net neutrality, although that would not be mentioned on MSNBC, which is owned by Comcast. It really was their main thing. That and their merger, but they wanted net neutrality to end. Trump ends net neutrality through Ajit Pai. I mean, it's total pay
and those
to
are
play.
just two of the people that put money into Michael Cohen, right?
Right. Yeah.
Into the,
And it's just
scam that was going. And you're right. I mean, with Sheldon Adelson, I mean, clearly this is a big issue. And don't forget, Monday is the day that we are officially moving the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, which has got all kinds of other complications on top of the fact that Tuesday is a key day after all these Friday protests within Gaza, that we should watch that region very closely. But sorry, I digress for a second. I agree. Every time it seems like there are transactional things that happen. There's clearly that tax bill that passed last year was transactional for many wealthy donors. I think when you add that transactional piece that they all got a giant tax cut and they're going to make more money, they can give you a little piece of it in campaign donations. But then when you do something like the Iranian deal that there's no good reason whatsoever to do, it only hurts our position once again internationally and is more likely to have nukes in a place we don't want nukes. That clearly is a priority for Sheldon Adelson. So you're right. I mean, this is a guy who spent a life being transactional. Why wouldn't he do that as president? Yeah. And why wouldn't Paul Ryan do that as the House Speaker?
Yeah, well, it seems to be the entire Republican philosophy. Hey, we're all about business. Let's make a deal. We're for sale. In any case, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. It's Middays with Mark, Friday edition, here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan will be with us for the hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan, and we'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's just a little past 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. And welcome back. Grant in Kenmore, Washington, listening on KBCS. Hey, Grant, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good day, Congressman. My question for you is, who across the aisle is supporting environmental legislation, and what can be done with Scott Pruitt?
Wow. So on the second one, we're dealing with that because it seems like, again, weekly we find out more things that show why this person's unfit, not just because of their position on the environment, but because of their conduct in office. And Scott Pruitt certainly is in that category. I think when it comes to the environment, it's been tough on the Republican side of the aisle. Technically, there is a caucus formed to deal with climate change because, the majority of the Republicans in Congress don't believe in the science of climate change, and we've been unable to get anything done proactively. In fact, everything has been regressive, rolling back things that we did during the Obama administration so far. But this caucus hasn't done a single thing because it's largely cover for those people in competitive districts to say that they're environmentally friendly, and yet there's been no work product whatsoever out of this group. So it's hard to say where there are specific Republicans that are champions for the environment. I don't think anyone's a champion on the other side of the aisle. Are there people who at least maybe recognize science? I think there's a few occasionally, but they certainly aren't speaking out, and that's part of the problem we've had. When you have a caucus that gives them some cover, yet nothing actually comes out of it, we're just continuing to see the rollbacks proposed by people like Scott Pruitt and others in the Trump administration, part of why we need to change a lot of the faces in November.
Yeah. Patricia in West Milton, Ohio, watching us on Free Speech TV. We have a minute and a half. Patricia, quick question for Congressman Pocan.
The caucus formed to deal with.
Oh no, you've got to listen to your phone. Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin. Kathy, we have a minute with Congressman Pocan. You got a quick question?
Okay, quick question. I've been in the labor movement a zillion years. I would like to know if the bill, which I haven't had a chance to read, the labor bill includes a provision that employers will actually get fined when they violate labor law, because that's been a really big thing. When somebody gets thrown out of work, if they recover, they get their recovery years later. There's only the amount of money that they lost, and the employer, that's the end of their liability. And I don't know too many other laws where employer can violate labor law and get away with it like that. I'll take my answer on the air. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, so Kathy, I think there are a number of bills that are out there. Our main one that we did this year, I think you're referring to, is the one that Bernie Sanders and I introduced, the Workplace Democracy Act. It covers a number of the rules that the Obama administration did that have been rolled back, but more importantly, it does some of the big picture stuff like a simple majority to be able to form a union, requiring companies to hold elections in a timely way, which is they're not doing currently, getting rid of right-to-work laws, so that states can't have right-to-work laws, things like that, including other provisions. So absolutely, there are a number of things that would be in place that would make it that if employer violates the law, they will be fined, and you can probably find it online easier, but it's a very, very comprehensive. It's kind of like the 800-pound gorilla of labor law all in one bill, yet there are many parts of it that are separate bills introduced currently in Congress.
Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls here on Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, Friday edition. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan right after this. Here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Lawrence in St. Paul, Minnesota, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, just a quick question from a voter to a politician.
Lawrence, your phone is fading out.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, just a quick question from a voter to a politician. What's our plan to take back the House and maybe the Senate? Now, I'm going to tell you, I qualified that statement. Quick question from a voter to a politician, because if we don't take back a plan, if we don't take back the House, I'm disenchanted with the Democratic Party. I'll take my answer off the air. What's our plan? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lawrence, I mean, clearly we're watching across the country special elections for state legislative seats. 40 have flipped since Donald Trump became president from Republican to Democratic, 4 the other way. So we've got a 10-to-1 advantage. Our base is energized. Their base is not. We are very aggressive with candidate recruitment. We've got some great candidates around the country, and we are running towards the fall with an economic message, because that's quite honestly what we failed to present adequately in 2016, and where Donald Trump said the right things on the surface but certainly didn't mean them. You know, he did a great job of identifying draining the swamp. The problem is he didn't tell you he just wanted to get access to it so he could build a high-rise condo on top of it, where we really need to address big corporations, big banks, and others that are actually making it tougher for people to get ahead in the economy. I see the Democrats doing that. Better yet, they're doing it in a joint way between the House and the Senate. I'm seeing it in state legislative races around the country. So I think there is a very energized and organized Democratic Party beyond what I can honestly say I've seen in recent cycles, getting ready for November. Now, Republicans will probably pull out some fear issue like they always do, and we have to be ready for that along the way, but it may be a little too late for them. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic about it. So just, what I would recommend, Lawrence, is if you care about this, make sure every week you're knocking for a candidate in your area that you believe in, because it's up to us to do it, not just saying, what's the strategy? The strategy is you get out and knock on doors and talk to voters, and if you can give a few dollars here and there to candidates, things like that, that's going to go really, really far.
Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, yeah, Mr. Polkhead. I was watching Morning Joe. I don't know if Tom watched it. Something caught my hearing. I mean, Donald Trump's not on solid grounds in the Midwest, but the Republican senators are sending a notice to Mitch McConnell, and you're probably going to get one in the House, to cancel the summer break because you guys are so obstructionist. You don't deserve a summer break. What is this obstruction that they're talking about? Do you know?
Yeah, this has been used, it's kind of like an old record, right? It comes up every year. Someone puts it out there on the Republican side, or sometimes vice versa, the other party. Where they're claiming is because we haven't approved enough of the president's judicial and other nominations. Well, in some cases, there's really good reasons. There's some really crappy people that have been appointed to these spots that are going to harm the public and harm the country, and that's why. And they're claiming that it's some kind of foot dragging, but we're foot dragging because when you appoint people to positions that shouldn't be there, and just look at all the turnover he's had in his office, he doesn't have a great track record. So I think that's what they're trying to make a point, saying we just need to be there longer. Doesn't matter. You can make us stay 24/7. If you have a bad appointment, it's going to be a bad appointment, and we're not going to just roll over. And again, I think it's one of their more pathetic messagings they put out there.
Amen. Jesse in Miami, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. We got to have a minute and a half to the break.
Okay. Happy belated birthday to you, Tom.
Thank you, Jesse.
Hi, Mr. Pocan. Mr. Pocan, what's the greatest lesson that we could take from what happened to Nazi Germany? Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse.
I'm not trying to compare things to Nazi Germany because I never think that's especially helpful right now. But I think a lesson out of Nazi Germany is that if people don't stand up when you need to stand up, just because it's not in your interest, you need to stand up for everyone's self-interest because we're all connected. We are a community. We need to watch out for everyone. The good news is I see this happening all the time. Right now, we've got lots and lots of people that are coming out for rallies. When there was the Women's March, I saw the LGBT community, I saw environmentalists, I saw labor. When we had the DACA rallies, again, I saw people from the faith and non-faith communities. I saw people coming in from other organizations that understand if we don't stand in solidarity, we will lose separately. So I see it happening, and I think that's probably an important lesson, which I think is being observed. We just have to keep vigilant, especially through November on that.
Yeah, it's kind of a variation on the famous British conservative Sir Edmund Burke that Thomas Paine had such a huge battle with, that he wrote Rights of Man as a rebuttal to Burke's positions. But anyhow, Burke brilliantly said, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Yes. And that's basically, it sounds to me like what you're saying, Congressman.
Yeah, and I would have been far more succinct had I said it that way.
No, I didn't mean to be
No, I hear you.
critical.
No, but that's exactly it. It's kind of like when people ask what's the Democratic message for fall. To me, it's the Paul Wellstone line, we all do better when we all do better, right? If we keep it simple, people understand it, and it completely works today as well as it did when Paul Wellstone was the U.S. Senator.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls. It's the Friday edition of Middays with Mark, and you can reach him. His website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be back with more of Congressman Pocan in just a moment.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of Middays with Mark, Friday edition, here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Gar Alperovitz's book, What Then Must We Do? Gar is an economist, by the way, and this is from the introduction. I borrowed my title, What Then Must We Do, from Tolstoy and the profoundly disturbing 1886 book that he wrote once he began to dig below the surface of what was happening in late 19th century Russia, a time when the system was in decay, the aristocracy enjoyed extraordinary luxury, and the peasants endured lives of hunger and pain. As a person of privilege, he began to understand something deeper about his time in history.
Tolstoy wrote, "I sit on a man's back, choking him and making him carry me, and yet assure myself and others that I am very sorry for him and wish to ease his lot by all means possible, except by getting off his back." Most of us do not literally sit on men's backs, making them carry us. We do, however, often uneasily look the other way, satisfying ourselves with modest changes that reassure us that all is well, while millions are in despair. We've done the best we can do, we might say, given the realities. Still, many sense, as did Tolstoy, that to actually do something serious would require us to confront much deeper problems than we are commonly willing to do. What then must we do is not shouted in the streets, but it is a question that more and more Americans, young and old, liberal, radical, and conservative, are quietly beginning to ask themselves in much more penetrating ways. So let us begin. My starting point is the obvious fact that despite its great wealth, the United States faces today enormous difficulties, with no easily discernible political answers that even begin to offer strategic handholds on a truly democratic future. Elections occur and major fiscal debates ensue, but many of the most pressing problems facing ordinary citizens are only marginally affected, and in many cases in ways that increase burdens, not reduce them. The issue is not simply that our situation is worrisome, however. It is that there are growing reasons to believe that we in fact face systemic problems, not simply political ones. Systemic problems in the fundamental, not the superficial sense. In the pages ahead, I will suggest that our nation's truly critical problems are built into the very structure of the economic and political system. They are not something passing in the night that will go away even when we elect forward-looking thinkers and actively pressure them to move in a different direction. I won't load you down with statistics at this point. A couple of obvious reminders, however. Not only has the economy been stagnating for a long time, but for the average person and the average family, things have been bad for a very long time. Real wages for 80% of Americans' workers, for example, have not gone up more than a trivial amount for the last 3 decades. At the same time, income for the top 1% has jumped from nearly 10% of all income to roughly 20% of all income. Put another way, virtually all of the gains of the entire economic system have gone to the tiny, tiny group at the top for at least 3 decades. Worth pausing to think about that one. What's going on when virtually all the gains for the entire economic system go to the top? I'm not interested here in criticizing those at the top. The question is, we can do that later. The question is, what is going on with the system when this kind of thing happens and continues to happen in an ongoing way, year after year, decade after decade? Another reminder, almost 50 million Americans live in officially defined poverty. The rate is higher, not lower, than in the late 1960s, another disturbing trend marker. Moreover, if we use the measuring standard common throughout the advanced world, which considers the poverty level to be half the median income level, the number would be just under 70 million, and the rate would be almost 23% of all Americans living in poverty. That is to say nothing of steady increases in global warming and an unemployment rate that, if properly measured, is stuck in the range of roughly 15%. At the most superficial level, Washington, as the saying goes, is broken. Give or take an occasional gain in selected areas, the political system is simply incapable of dealing with the deeper challenges. It focuses on deficits, not answers. Long trends that don't change are a clear signal that it's not simply the modern period of partisan bickering and congressional stalemate that is causing the problems. The trends are moving steadily downward. We're moving steadily downward long before the Tea Party and the recent partisan foolishness, long before the Citizens United Supreme Court decision allowed corporations to put big money directly into politics, and long before many events that have heralded as tipping points one kind or another. Nor are people stupid. More and more have a sense that something different is going on, both with the economy and more fundamentally with democracy itself. A few more bits of information just as reminders again of something that we're all beginning to see. A mid-2011 poll found that roughly 80% of Americans believe their congressional representatives to be, quote, more interested in serving the needs of special interest groups than the people they represent, end quote. Another poll found that almost 4 out of 5 believe a few rich people in corporations have far too much power. And only 37% of Americans, much more than a third of the population, have confidence in the most solemn and august of American institutions, the Supreme Court. I'm going to dig much, much deeper into all of this, of course, but for now, let's leave it at this. When critical long trends do not improve, when they steadily get worse year in and year out, it is clear that we face deeply rooted systemic problems, not simply political problems in the usual sense of the term. Moreover, as these polls suggest, people increasingly understand that something is really wrong. The question is, how do we deal with a systemic crisis, something built into the way the political economy works, rather than just a simple political or economic crisis? Garo Parvitz, what then must we do? Days with Mark, Friday edition. Congressman Mark Pocan here on the Thom Hartmann Program, taking your calls for the hour. Richard in Kettering, Ohio, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Tom, and hello, Congressman Pocan. So good to talk to both of you. Thank you. I wanted to get your thoughts about the governor's race shaping up here in Ohio. As you know, it's going to be Mike DeWine and Richard Cordray. I would have preferred Dennis Kucinich, but in any case, what are your thoughts about the chances of it going the Democratic way?
Again, Ohio, as you know, is one of these, I don't always prefer the term purple states, but swing states. States like Wisconsin, I think we have red areas, we have blue areas. We actually don't have that many purple areas, so calling a state that sometimes I think doesn't provide the right information. But it's going to come down to turnout in so many of these races, and as you know, the governor's races are especially important because whoever gets elected governor in the states that have the races up this cycle is when redistricting is going to happen. So if we're going to allow the gerrymandering to continue that's happened in so many states that have Republican control, that's why we're having the really steep hill to try to change legislative makeups and try to change the faces in Congress. So governor's races really have to be at everyone's priority also as they're looking at November. And I think if we can get our base out, we have a good shot in places like Ohio and Wisconsin and other states that I guess, again, get termed purple, but really we just need to make sure our turnout happens unlike what happened in 2016, and especially Ohio and Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, were all very similar in that we had a lot of drop-off because we didn't articulate a good economic message. Hopefully we can do a much better job this time.
Albert in Marina Del Rey, California, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. Congressman, I've got a question for you. The 2nd Congressional District in Nebraska is running a former Republican and is being sponsored by the DCCC. Now, you're a member of the Congressional Democratic Party. How does this happen, and where is your accountability and the rest of the progressive Democrats? How does that happen? Please explain.
Yeah, so, I think one of the great confusions that's out there, and Keith Ellison and I just had this conversation this week, is, and rightfully so, we wouldn't expect people to know all the differences with the various organizations, but people sometimes get mixed up. The DNC, which is the Democratic National Committee, the DCCC, which is the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which is the campaign arm of the House Democrats, which you're not necessarily a member, but it is the arm that tries to elect Democrats to the House. There's a Senate operation. Then we have groups like the DPCC, Tom, because we like to make things very confusing, which is our message folks within the caucus. So there's all these different entities, and for most people, they just understand why is it the Democrats are doing this, either good or bad, but often when we hear about it, they're unhappy. And with the DCCC, there have been a number of times this cycle where people are not happy. I think the one that probably got the most recognition was in Texas, where they got involved in a race that does have a runoff coming up actually this month, where instead of where someone normally would back a candidate maybe over others, although we prefer that they stay out of primaries, period, to allow the voters to make that decision, they came out negatively after someone. So they didn't proactively support someone, they just attacked one candidate, and that really backfired. It raised a lot of money for the person they attacked, and now that person is in the final runoff. So, we often have conversations with the DCCC about what they're doing around elections, and, it's not like I have a vote per se in how it operates. However, we certainly try to make sure that they're not doing things that are going to put us in jeopardy. And I do think sometimes when they do negatively go after someone or get involved in primaries, it works negatively for us. Now, it's a little different on the Progressive Caucus. We do identify progressives in races, and we try to, where we can, back those people. Although this cycle, it's been a bit more interesting because in many races there's multiple good progressives running. We're watching the Pennsylvania primaries very closely that are coming up next Tuesday. But Albert, I certainly hear your concerns about how the DCCC has operated. We have had, again, those conversations with many of their folks in their leadership, and hoping that they won't try to tip the scale too often, because sometimes when they tip the scale, they drop the scale on the floor and it breaks, and we elect Republicans.
Jill in Bartlett, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good afternoon. Huge supporter of universal health care. And one point is, though, I believe it's 1.45% tax by employers into Medicare. Is that still tax deductible for the corporations? And if so, why does the Democrat Party not fight that, especially after this huge tax circus that we just went through? And again, and I'll get off the phone, but when we talk about universal health care, I think to stay the course, we need a plan and a broadcasted and a published plan and exactly how we're going to pay for it. And would 1% or 1.45% from corporations across the country take care of universal health care? Thank you. I'll take my answer off here.
Yeah, Jill, great questions. And let me try to talk about it the way I think we should talk about it, because it will get more people's attention, which is, just first of all, on the value that, you shouldn't simply because you're sick go bankrupt or, not be able to get the care you need in a country like the United States. Clearly in Canada and most of Europe, this system is completely different than ours, and it works quite well. Canada is not a third world country, so there are plenty of good examples out there that we could replicate, and which is why many of us have advocated for a single payer or a Medicare for all system. What we're right now is having this conversation about how to best present this to people, because I think where you can get lost, and it doesn't help us as much, is when you start saying this is exactly how you'd fund it, because then whoever is affected by that funding source will not like it. We think the best thing to do is put the value out there. We all agree that's a value. Everyone should have access to affordable health care, but everyone should have access. From there, how do we get it done? And there are many ways. Just in the savings alone, the current system, medical professionals have told us 15% of everything, their overhead, is just overhead of shuffling papers, right? Right off the bat, you take off 15% of the cost when you have a system that's far more efficient in the way we're talking about a universal single-payer system. There's other things that you can do, too, and you can start showing the various ways you can pay for this several-fold. But I think if we get lost on a funding source, then that becomes the debate rather than the value, which is that everyone should have access to health care. Nancy Pelosi, I remember when I was a freshman, and she says this a lot, but it really took to my brain, and I try to remember it, is that values unite and issues divide. And I think we see that happen often. So let's talk about single payer as a value, and I think you'll find people who are independents and even Republicans who all agree that it makes sense and that it's a far more efficient system, and then we can figure out the particulars, which there are more than enough options of how you can do it once we have the value agreed on.
That's a really important point that had never occurred to me. Values unite and issues divide. Thank you for that, Congressman.
Yeah, it's something that just really stuck with me because, again, if you can get people on the values, we can negotiate all the rest of the stuff. But as you and I know, because we've had this conversation many times, Tom, with listeners, there are a lot of different ways that you can not only have cost savings by having a single-payer system, but also there's a lot of other revenue sources out there. I mean, just the one revenue source alone that the Progressive Caucus has put out there, and now Democrats are solidly behind, is this high-speed financial transaction fee that is done already in the European Union. We have a very, very small proposed amount for these people who do these high-speed transactions. It brings in $1 trillion a year. I mean, there are all sorts of things, but once you start focusing on one, quite honestly, then anyone who is going to be affected by that finds ways to fight you on that issue. But it's the value that people really do agree on regardless of the political spectrum. I doubt there are many people who honestly think, no, if you're sick, you shouldn't have health care if you're not rich. That's just not something that many people really believe. So let's work from the value side, and then we'll figure out the details to how to actually fund it, which we have, fortunately, a whole lot of options.
Amen. Silas in Philadelphia, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, good day, gentlemen. I have an idea for putting Hillary in the White House in 2019. Have her run for Congress from her congressional district. When she's elected, elect her Speaker of the House, impeach Trump and Pence, and voila, she's in the White House where she belongs.
Okay.
Phyllis, I see a novelist, a novel in the making. You could put it out there. There are a lot of people out there talking about the various options. Like, what happens if you impeach Trump? Does Mike Pence become president? And, then now watching him trying to stop the investigation as well, I'm certainly curious, is Pence going to be more directly involved than maybe some of us thought in the past? And then whoever's the speaker is third in line. And if we flip the House in November, whoever the Democratic speaker is would be in line to be president. So there's lots of interesting, I call it fantasy politics. It's like fantasy football. But for those of us who follow politics, scenarios you could put out there, I think yours, Phyllis, is definitely novel-worthy.
Yeah, it definitely is. That could be a movie, too. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's the Friday edition of Middays with Mark. And you can contact Congressman Pocan through his website, pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him. And he does read his Twitter feed, and he will reply at Rep, R-E-P, Mark, M-A-R-K, Pocan, P-O-C-A-N, Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
More of Middays with Mark Pocan right after this. And welcome back. Congressman, just FYI, yesterday we did an open lines poll where people just called in, and I quickly put them on the air without screening them. And the question was, who do you want to see on the Democratic ticket in 2020? And you got to vote. This is how it starts, right?
I didn't know my mom listens to the program. That's great.
There you go. Kathleen in Turner, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Well, good morning to both of you. I'll give him another vote.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you, Kathleen. That's very nice.
I do have a question about an issue that was very important only a few short months ago, but we're not hearing anything or much about it now, and that is gun control legislation. What is happening at the federal level? It seems that much of it is being left up to the states, where we end up with some things that make a lot of sense and other things, such as here in Oregon, we get some fairly extreme proposals. Can you update us on what's happening at the federal level?
Yeah, absolutely, Kathleen. So unfortunately, Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell will not schedule and will not have any gun legislation move, even when we thought that the president, the administration, was talking a few good games, like on bump stocks and some other issues. There's been a complete stop from that conversation coming from the White House as well. The good news, however, is that has not stopped public opinion and has not stopped activists. So the activists are still very active. They're working to change the faces of those who won't change the laws in November. They're working in state legislatures like they were able to do in Florida and pass some smart legislation around gun violence, and they're working on that, and that's great to have in place so that maybe when the majority changes in Congress, we can be looking at some of those examples, although we certainly have some ideas where we need to move on this issue anyway. And then finally, I would just say electorally, we just had a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin in April, and Supreme Court races are always kind of obscure. People don't follow them really, really closely. But for the first time in an open seat since I think it was 96, we elected someone who was more liberal to the Supreme Court in Wisconsin. And what was interesting is the NRA was an issue. The NRA endorsing the conservative became an issue. And even in the deepest hunting parts of our state, 49% in one congressional district and 50.5% in another voted for the candidate who raised the issue of the NRA backing the conservative candidate, because they realized that, as a someone who hunts and family traditions, no one is going after your rifle. Someone who has a handgun for personal protection, no one is going after your handgun. But the NRA is really about gun manufacturers just trying to sell more guns so that they can take more vacations and have bigger garages than their neighbors. It's about greed, and ours is about survival. So we are winning very much so on the public opinion side of it. We're winning in some localized fights on this, and we will win at the federal race when we prove it by changing some of the faces of the people who refuse to do anything about guns.
That is fascinating. We just have 15 seconds to the break. Are you seeing that kind of thing happening, and are you hearing from your colleagues that this is the same sort of thing is happening around the country?
We haven't had that many specials since this, but I'll tell you, or elections that I've seen. But the Wisconsin example, I mean, you know, Wisconsin, if you live north of Highway 29 in Wisconsin, every candidate who runs for office has carcasses of animals on their literature because everyone hunts in those areas.
Right.
And NRA used to be something, if you touched it, you know, you couldn't because NRA was seen as that. People are now discerning the difference and that, you know, gun violence has to be stopped, and yet it doesn't have to conflict with hunting rights, and that's where we're finally winning.
That's great. Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Our Friday edition here in the Thom Hartmann Program. And Patricia in West Milton, Ohio, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. I'm a first-time caller. I am a Free Speech TV builder. I give $20 out of my $2,000 every month, year after year. And I'm calling about an urgent issue. We are no longer being provided liquid oxygen for emphysema or any COPD disease, and it's killing us because we can't go outside. I don't know if Mr. Pocan can address that, but I would appreciate him looking into it.
Yeah, Patricia, you know, thank you so much for raising it. I'm not familiar with the issue, but what I'm going to do is make sure that I'll look into it to see if it's something specific Ohio, if it's something national, what exactly is going on, and I will be very glad to report about it next week when we're on the program.
Norma in Montgomery, Alabama, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
I don't know if y'all have seen the ads for a new documentary that I think is going to be on CNN, but it's about the draft. And this raised a question in my mind about why now instead of last month at the 50th anniversary of Kent State. And if they are now talking up the draft, this time it would be boys and girls, your sons and daughters, because they have passed a rule that women can fight in combat. And I was wondering if you had heard anything, any rumors or rumbles about reenacting the draft so Trump can build up his military.
No, I have not heard a peep about that. I think, you know, most of what we're trying to do these days is make sure that, you know, he not insult international leaders via Twitter, that we try our best not to waste money on a military parade that even the military doesn't want, just so that Donald Trump can feel, you know, as important as the North Korean leader apparently feels when he has a parade. We're trying to stop some of those things, but around the draft there has been, I would have to say, zero chatter about anything being reinstated. I think they're probably just doing it, like you said, in conjunction with some anniversaries, and maybe they just got a little behind is why they missed it.
Anthony in Georgetown, Kentucky, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, thanks, fellas. Congressman, the other day I was listening to one of your colleagues. I don't know too much about him, Chuck Grassley, I think, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right.
Yep.
But he was talking about this plan every other week, every other Wednesday. He submits 5 judges to be appointed circuit court or district court, and they already have 16, and he's trying to get 50 by the end of the year. Is that anything you can stop, or how does that work? And he was talking about these blue slips if they don't have anything, and I didn't understand what he was talking about with them blue slips. I'll listen.
Anthony, great question. I can give you a quick as version as I can because it's a little bit complicated. But part of the problem is they're putting some bad appointments out there for some of the judicial nominations. The Senate Democrats have been trying to slow some of that down because we don't want to put bad people in positions, especially positions that kind of go forever. And what's really interesting is Senator Grassley has been one of the people that has often been one of our bigger problems when it's just the opposite, like trying to delay them. So now they're trying to use this excuse that we're trying to somehow just drag our feet. Here's what just happened in and I'm forgetting the district, but it includes Wisconsin. I had an article on this. They just had an appointment. They held up for 6 years under Barack Obama, appointing someone to a position, and then they just did it over the objections of Senator Baldwin from Wisconsin. They violated the way they've just held up all the other appointments for 6 years to that.
Right. They let Republican Senator Ron Johnson block this for 6 years, and then when Tammy Baldwin tried to block it for 1 month, they said, no, you can't do that. You're a Democrat. Exactly. And, so they're playing the rules very differently in how they've always been done. So for Chuck Grassley, who is the point person on the Republican side in the Senate on these issues, to somehow act like we're dragging our feet when in reality they're changing the rules and putting in some cases, some really bad people names out there to be appointed, that's what they're trying to get at. They're trying to blame us for dragging feet as opposed to having a proper review so you don't have people in positions for the rest of their lives that shouldn't be in them. James in Lakewood, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Was that James? You broke up.
That's you. You're on the air.
All right. How's my phone?
Sounds great. What's up?
Okay, good. Hey, Congressman. First off, a side note, what you can prove, okay? Offshore corporations are essentially what we have in the United States. They're all registered offshore for the most part. If they're supporting a political party or a political candidate, isn't that treason?
Well, I don't think by a definition an offshore corporation supporting someone would be treason, because I think by definition alone, treason is going against our country. So I'm not sure if that would work. I certainly understand the point you're making, James, which is, when, especially when corporations have run to find smaller companies to buy overseas so they can evade paying U.S. taxes, and then, they still have all this influence and the rights and the rights of corporations here. It certainly seems to be a disconnect, and you think that if they really were proud to be a part of this country and they're making their profits here, they wouldn't try to find ways to essentially scam the system. But it is a legal scam. It's a legal loophole. But I don't think treason would be involved.
Yeah, I think to that point, Novartis, which gave Michael Cohen all that money, I think it was $1.2 million, is a Swiss company. And here they are, passing money along to the president and his fixer and all this kind of stuff. It's unseemly at the very best. Yeah. Anyhow, Congressman, we have 40 seconds left in the hour. Thoughts on what we should be looking at, what we should be noticing, what we should be doing over the next week?
Net neutrality is the big one coming up. There could very likely be a vote next week in the Senate. And if they do, it will pass. They have enough votes, it looks like, but we got to make sure we shore up people's spines on that. But then it will come to the House, and then we've got a whole lot of work to do to organize to get people ready for the CRA that would overturn the FCC decision that took away net neutrality. So for anyone who cares about this, which trust me is a lot of people, Tom, I had over almost 13,000 people reach out to me on this in my district alone. This is the time to contact your senators and to contact your House representatives to make sure that they're supporting overturning what the FCC did on net neutrality.
There you go. And the number for the the switchboard for both the House and Senate, 202-224-3121. Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Really, really, really enjoy these segments, and I'm so glad you can do them. Congressman Mark Pocan, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
Today we're reading in Thom Hartmann University Book Club from How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, Time-Tested Methods for Conquering Worry by Dale Carnegie, perhaps an appropriate book in the era of Trump. This is from Chapter 2, a magic formula for solving worry situations. Would you like a quick, surefire recipe for handling worry situations, a technique you can start using right away before you go any further in reading this book? Then let me tell you about the method worked out by Willis H. Carrier, the brilliant engineer who launched the air conditioning industry and who headed the world-famous Carrier Corporation out of Syracuse, New York. It is one of the best techniques I've ever heard of for solving worry problems, and I got it from Mr. Carrier personally when we were having lunch together one day at the Engineers Club in New York. When I was a young man, Mr. Carrier said, I worked for the Buffalo Forge Company in Buffalo, New York. I was handed the assignment of installing a gas cleaning device in the plant of the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company at Crystal City, Missouri, a plant costing millions of dollars. The purpose of this installation was to remove the impurities from the gas so it could be burned without injuring the engines. This method of cleaning gas was new. It had been tried only once before and under different conditions. In my work at Crystal City, Missouri, unforeseen difficulties arose. It worked after a fashion, but not well enough to meet the guarantee we had made. I was stunned by my failure. It was almost as if someone had struck me a blow on the head. My stomach, my insides began to twist and turn. For a while, I was so worried I couldn't sleep. Finally, common sense reminded me that worry wasn't getting me anywhere. So I figured out a way to handle my problem without worrying. It worked superbly. I've been using the same anti-worry technique for more than 30 years. It is simple. Anyone can use it. It consists of 3 steps. Step 1. I analyzed the situation fearlessly and honestly and figured out what was the worst that could possibly happen as a result of this failure. No one was going to jail me or shoot me, that was certain. True, there was also a chance that I could lose my job, and there was also a chance that my employers would have to remove the machinery and lose the $20,000 we had invested. Step 2. After figuring out what was the worst that could possibly happen, I reconciled myself to accepting it, if necessary. I said to myself, this failure will be a blow to my record and it might possibly mean the loss of my job. But if it does, I can always get another position. Conditions could be much worse, and as far as my employers are concerned, well, they realize that we're experimenting with a new method of cleaning gas, and if this experience costs them $20,000, they can stand it. They can charge it up to research, for it is an experiment. After discovering the worst that could possibly happen and reconciling myself to accepting it, if necessary, an extremely important thing happened. I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in days. Step 3. From that time on, I calmly devoted my time and energy to trying to improve upon the worst which I had already accepted mentally. I now tried to figure out ways and means by which I might reduce the loss of $20,000 that we faced. I made several steps and finally figured out that if we spent another $5,000 for additional equipment, our problem would be solved. We did this, and instead of the firm losing $20,000, we made $15,000. I probably would never have been able to do this if I had kept on worrying, because one of the worst features about worrying is that it destroys the mind's ability to concentrate. When we worry, our minds jump here and there and everywhere, and we lose all power of decision. However, when we force ourselves to face the worst and accept it mentally, we then eliminate all these vague imaginings and put ourselves in a position where we are able to concentrate on our problem in the here and now. This incident that I have related occurred many years ago. It worked so superbly that I've been using it ever since, and as a result, my life has been almost completely free from worry. End of quote. Now, why is Willis H. Carrier's magic formula so valuable and so practical, psychologically speaking? Because it yanks us down out of the great gray clouds in which we fumble around when we are blinded by worry. It plants our feet good and solid on the earth. We know where we stand, and if we can't have solid ground under us, how in creation can we ever hope to think anything through? Professor William James, the father of applied psychology, has been dead since 1910, but if he were alive today and could hear this formula for facing the worst, he would heartily approve. How do I know? Because he told his own students, quote, "Be willing to have it so. Be willing to have it so," he said, because acceptance of what has happened is the first step in overcoming the consequences of any misfortune, end quote. The same idea is expressed by Lin Yutang in his widely read book, The Importance of Living. True peace of mind, says this Chinese philosopher, comes from accepting the worst. Psychologically, I think it means the release of energy. That's it exactly. Psychologically, it means a new release of energy. When we have accepted the worst, we have nothing more to lose. And that automatically means we have everything to gain. After facing the worst, Willis H. Carrier reported, I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in days. From that time on, I was able to think. Makes sense, doesn't it? Yet millions of people have wrecked their lives in angry turmoil because they refused to accept the worst, refused to improve upon it, refused to salvage what they could from the wreck. Instead of trying to reconstruct their fortunes, they engaged in a bitter and violent contest of experience and ended up victims of that brooding fixation known as melancholia. Would you like to see how someone else adopted Willis H. Carrier's magic formula and applied it to his own problem? Well, here's one example from a New York oil dealer who was a student in my classes. I was being blackmailed, the student began. I didn't believe it was possible. I didn't believe it could happen outside the movies, but I was actually being blackmailed by a 20. And, he goes on with the story. It's a fascinating one. How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Anything Goes Friday. Marianne and Pamela Aiden are going to drop by in about 15 minutes and just talk with us about investment strategies in these bizarre times. I'm looking forward to that conversation. That said, it's Anything Goes Friday. There are a few things that I wanted to share with you. And one of them, actually, is, from Donald Trump. Remember this when Trump was on the campaign? This is audio coming out of my computer here, Sean, if you need to pot this up. This was Donald Trump on the campaign trail.
Every Republican wants to do a big number on Social Security. They want to do it on Medicare. They want to do it on Medicaid. And we can't do that. And it's not fair to the people that have been paying in for years, and now all of a sudden they want to be cut. And it's my...
Yeah, and then there's a whole there's a whole mashup of these comments by Trump that was published May 22nd of last year at the Washington Post. All these times Trump saying, yeah, we're going to negotiate drug prices for Medicare. We're going to preserve Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. No cuts at all. This is what he campaigned on. This is what he was elected on, and this is what he's not doing. You'll recall back in 2005. George W. Bush and the Republicans pushed through this thing called Medicare Part D. And Medicare Part D caused the Medicare program to start picking up the drug costs for millions of citizens on Medicare. And that adds hundreds of billions of dollars a year to the cost of Medicare. And of course, the reason the Republicans did this was because they want to whack Medicare. Well, plus they thought it would be popular, right? People will like having their drugs paid for, so we'll do it this way. But being Republicans, they had to figure out a way to make sure that most of that money, not only it was a twofer really, not only would it weaken Medicare over time because it added expense, but we'll double down on weakening Medicare by passing a law that says that while the Pentagon, for example, the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration, they can negotiate drug prices, right? If you check into a VA hospital and you need penicillin, and those penicillin pills retail for $1 a pill if you walk into a pharmacy and buy them one at a time, The Veterans Administration went to the manufacturers of penicillin and said, you know, this year we're going to buy 5 million of these things. So give us a price better than $1 a pill. And the manufacturer says, okay, great, we'll sell them to you for 22 cents a pill. You know, we'll give you a really good wholesale price. And the Veterans Administration buys them at that very low price. But when it came to Medicare recipients, the Republicans said when people on Medicare have the Medicare institution pay for their pharmaceuticals, the amount paid has to be the full retail price specified by the manufacturer. Now, this is one of the reasons that you're seeing manufacturers raise drug prices 1,000%, 500%, 30%, 90%, 6,000%, whatever it may be. It's not so much to screw you and me as retail customers. It's to be able to extract even more money out of Medicare. So back 2 years ago, Donald Trump said, you know, we need to let Medicare negotiate prescription drug prices. He campaigned on this. But now, and now he's going to be making this announcement today or Monday about how we're going to lower drug prices. Robert Pear, writing in today's New York Times, President Trump will lay out on Friday, I guess it's today, a broad strategy to reduce prescription drug prices. But in a break from one of his most popular campaign promises, he will not call for Medicare to negotiate lower prices with drug manufacturers. Now, this is the big thing that Novartis feared. They gave Michael Cohen $1.2 million, and I'm sure that other big drug companies' lobbyists were pouring money into the Republican Party. And so now Trump says, you know, we're not gonna have Medicare negotiate prices. Yes, we could say the estimated back in 2005 when this bill was negotiated, the Democrats came out and said the additional profit to drug manufacturers over the first 10 years of Medicare Part D, that'd be 2005 to 2015, the additional profit will be $600 billion. That's the profit, not the revenue, not the gross receipts. That's the money left over that the drug company executives and their stockholders can put in their own personal pockets and use a portion of it, of course, to pay off Donald Trump. You know, Spanky is totally transactional. All he does is, hey, what's in it for me? And that's the governing philosophy of the entire Republican Party. It's Ayn Randism raised to political art. Ayn Rand, who famously said that if you care about people, if you love people, you're not a worthy human being. That love is a weak emotion. That we shouldn't care for each other. That there's no such thing as society. It's just individuals, which was paraphrased by Margaret Thatcher back in the late 70s, early 80s. So that's what they're up to, and that's what's going on. I think it's just astonishing. And then finally, I wanted to mention the federal judiciary, and then I'll pick up your phone calls here. Mitch McConnell said, and I quote, "I think the tax bill will make an important difference to the country. But when the political winds shift, we never just do tax cuts alone. When we did a comprehensive tax reform 30 years ago, it lasted 4 years. What I want to do is make a lasting contribution to the country, and by appointing and confirming these strict constructionists to the courts, who are in their late 40s or early 50s, I believe working in conjunction with this administration, we're making a generational change in our country that will be repeated over and over and over down through the years." In other words, we don't care if we win or lose elections as long as we have the judiciary, as long as we have all the federal judges being right-wing cranks. And this is why they blocked, I mean, literally, Ron Johnson, the Republican senator from Wisconsin, for 6 years, blocked an appointment by President Obama to the circuit court in Wisconsin, a federal judge, lifetime appointment, blocked that for 6 years. Obama's out of office, Trump comes in, Trump proposes a right-wing crank instead of a reasonable judge. In fact, the one that Obama had appointed was not even necessarily much of a progressive. I mean, it was just a right-down-the-middle judge. But Trump comes in, appoints a right-wing crank, and Tammy Baldwin, who is the other senator from Wisconsin, says, I'm not going to turn in my blue slip. I'm going to block this the same way Ron Johnson blocked Obama's appointment for 6 years. And Mitch McConnell says, I don't care if you turn in your blue slip or not. We're gonna vote on this judge. In other words, he changed the rules. It's bizarre. And who are the kinds of people that the Republicans are appointing? Well, I just got this from Credo Action. CredoAction.com is the website. Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee advanced one of Donald Trump's most extreme right-wing judicial nominees, Howard Nielsen. Nielsen spent his career defending the NRA's dangerous agenda, fighting against gay rights and women's rights, and supporting the legalization of torture. Howard Nielsen has called state laws that prevent people younger than 21 from purchasing handguns and from publicly carrying firearms unconstitutional. He tried to overturn a ban on assault weapons in Illinois by arguing that high-powered rifles are not as dangerous as pistols and revolvers. He defended California's anti-LGBTQ Proposition 8, a policy that banned same-sex marriage, and argued that the judge hearing the case should recuse himself because he was gay. In 2005, while holding a key position in George W. Bush's Department of Justice, Nielsen wrote a memo that justified the torture of civilians captured by U.S. forces in Afghanistan. In 2014, Nielsen represented congressional Republicans in opposing EPA regulations on greenhouse gas emissions. In 2016, he co-authored an amicus brief in the Supreme Court case of Whole Woman's Health versus Hellerstedt, arguing in favor of imposing medically unnecessary standards on health facilities that offer abortions. Those regulations would have forced a majority of Texas abortion providers to shutter their doors. Trump and his extremist Republican Party are trying to fill the federal courts with right-wing judges who will legitimize their hateful policies, undo decades of civil rights progress, and empower the NRA. We cannot allow that to happen. So that's my rant for the hour. As I said, Pamela and Marianne Aiden will be with us in about 5 minutes. Stick around, and then we'll be getting into Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. So stick around. We'll be right back. Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. This is your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. It's 15 and a half minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with your calls at Anything Goes Friday, right after this. Jim in Seattle, listening on KBCS. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Yes, I was calling about the superdelegates thing. I don't get it, Tom, why the Democrats, don't get rid of it and get rid of it now, not at the midterm, but now, so that people like you and I, regular people, I don't know whether it was true that Hillary bought off all the superdelegates or not, but whether it did or not, the idea, it sucks, and it sucks particularly for the young people who are coming up. Now, why should anyone's vote count more than individuals?
I think they cut the number of superdelegates by about half, didn't they?
I haven't heard that.
Yeah, there was some substantial reform last year. In fact, Keith Ellison came on this program and talked about it, or maybe it was Tom Perez, to dial back the superdelegates. The one thing that they do want to keep, and I understand the argument for this, some of the superdelegates are elected officials, and others of the superdelegates are, party. I don't know what the word is, but, for example, former presidents, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, they're all superdelegates. And the idea is that you want to have some continuity in the party. You want to have some sort of stability in the party. You want to have the voices of the people who have worked their butts off for the party their whole entire lives to have some say, in what the party is doing. And, I understand that argument. I don't support it, though. I think that we should simply do away with all the superdelegates, frankly. And, and if those people want to be delegates, they should simply run as delegates in their, congressional districts.
I agree. Well, I think if the Democratic Party did that, got rid of it now, and pushed that nationally again and again, along with a drive for paper ballots all over the country.
Yeah.
Those two things, again, we're going to have to do something to get Trump out of there. And with the thing with North Korea and all that, particularly if that's successful, it's going to be really, really hard to do that. We need to take a new tack, and that would be a new one. Get rid of the superdelegates, focus on paper ballots nationally the whole time, whether we get them or not. And I think it'll be a change. We've got to have a change for the people who are younger than you and I, who are the ones who now are going to be running the country.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for the call, Jim. Paolo in Bristol, UK. Hey, Paolo, what's up?
Hi, Thom. How are you?
I'm fine.
Okay, look, sorry about that. I just like to make an observation about comparing the fascist state in the 1930s and today, because, you know, it seems like with all of this happening, I have a feeling that in retrospect, it seems like I have more reason to be hopeful if I was living in the 1930s compared to today, because it seems like, unlike back then, I'm worried that there's nobody who'll be in a position to save the world from its fascist self if things get worse. What do you think of that?
What, can you summarize that point in just a few words?
Okay, because unlike today, it seems like back then, the U.S. was there to save, led by Frank FDR, was there to save the world
in a
from
way,
its fascist
Paolo,
self.
but you know, there was a very active and vigorous fascist movement in the United States. In fact, there was an active and vigorous Nazi movement run largely by the German Bund. I'm not sure that we can do a one-to-one comparison with the 30s and today, particularly with things like social media. But it's an interesting conversation. I'm just not exactly sure where to go with it, beyond encouraging people to read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and they thought they were free. Paolo, thank you for the call.
Yeah.
Excellent question. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and we're working on getting the Aiden sisters online. It may be at the bottom of the hour. Michael in Snohomish, Washington. Hey, Michael, thanks for listening to KBCS. What's up?
Yeah, if a politician has leftover assets in their political campaign fund, what happens to it? Can the politician pocket the assets on their own?
Yes.
On their own?
Yeah, they can. It's not quite that simple. They've got to jump through a few legal hoops and accounting hoops. Stephen Colbert really did a brilliant job of exposing all this back 3 years ago or 5 years ago when he was doing the Colbert Report on Comedy Central. He set up a super PAC, and then after the election, he had a bunch of money left in the super PAC, and he had his lawyer come on and explain to him how he could transfer that money out of his super PAC or out of his campaign fund and into, actually it was a super PAC, out of his super PAC and into his own pocket. And you can't actually take it as income, but you can use it to pay your mortgage. You can, you know, if you're claiming that you're doing business out of your house, you can use it to cover all business expenses. You can use it to pay for the lease on your car. You can, all kinds of stuff that you can do with it, Michael.
So the Trump crime family could make a bundle.
They are making a bundle. And what the poor suckers who are donating to the Trump campaign, I read these on the air frequently. I haven't gotten one in a couple of days. I wonder if they got wise and dropped me up from the list. But, I'm at least 3 or 4 days a week, I get a fundraising solicitation from Donald Trump and for his Trump 2020 campaign. And where that money is going, or much of that money is going, is to pay the legal bills of Trump's cronies and Trump's and the other members of the Trump crime family. So, yeah, this is there's some really crappy stuff going on, really bad, evil stuff going on in our political system, and this is a big piece of it. And it was entirely made possible by the Supreme Court, which we have to keep remembering. This is why it's so important not to put right-wing cranks on the court. Michael, thank you for the call. John in Everett, Washington. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom. You brought up a really good point earlier here about the judges and the appointees and everything, how that's going to affect us for the next 20, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it just amazes me. The Senate and the House, they're run like little fiefdoms. The guys can do at will what they want. The fellows in charge, like the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader.
Yep.
It just I would think that if you want to change a rule, you would need 2/3 a vote of the body to change a rule, instead of just the Speaker or the man in charge of the Senate just changing the rules willy-nilly.
Well, there's two pieces to this, John. Number one, the rules can be changed with a simple majority vote, and that's in the Constitution, basically, that each body will make its own rules, and it'll make it by majority vote. But then the second part of it is the enforcement of the rules. Mitch McConnell is the one who is supposed to enforce the rule that if a home state senator does not like a judge who's been appointed into that state by the administration, they don't turn in that blue slip. They don't provide their permission for that judge to go forward. And then Mitch McConnell is supposed to follow that rule and say, okay, fine, we're not going to consider that person. So what McConnell is basically saying is that he's not going to enforce the law. He's not going to enforce the rule. He hasn't changed it. He's simply ignoring it.
I follow you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So which is arguably even more perfidious, is that a word? Is even more evil. So, John, thanks for the call. Don in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Don, what's up?
Well, Tom, I just thought I would bring up something that I found.
Don, can you take me off speakerphone?
Oh, I'm sorry. I had you off it, and then I accidentally switched you off. I'm sorry. Anyway, this is about the recent primary in Ohio. I'm in Akron, and we had Dennis Kucinich, who was supported by Our Revolution, and Nina Turner came here, and he was running neck and neck with the other candidate,
Richard Cordray, who was the head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and is a good progressive himself.
Well, that wasn't the impression I got from the debate that was online. But in any case, the Democratic machine, I would say, from my perspective, really came to become very caustic on Dennis. And, Cordray had an A rating from the NRA. Dennis was the only candidate in the primary who had an F. And so I don't really think that Cordray is well, I would call it progressive, whatever. And the thing is, he was also supported strongly by Elizabeth Warren, who I'm sure knew him because of the association with that institution that she was.
I think the reality that the Democratic Party was looking at in Ohio is that Dennis Kucinich, and this was proven by the vote in the primary, was that Dennis Kucinich had a lot of popularity in the congressional district that he represented for years and years in the House of Representatives. People there knew him, and they knew him well. But outside of that district, all people knew of him was basically the caricature that had been presented in the press for years and years. The guy who thinks that flying saucers are coming to get us. The guy who, I don't want to go through the whole list, but there's been a bunch of things over the years.
And it was unmerited, and I think it was part of the whole way the press is in this country.
I agree.
But
Kucinich has been the victim of a lot of right-wing hits over the years.
But just in a nutshell, just not to belabor it, but this reminded me of what happened to Henry Wallace. It reminded me of what happened to Bernie.
Yep.
I don't trust Elizabeth Warren. I just don't. She seems like a politician to me.
Well, I trust her a lot, and she historically was not a politician. And in fact, she had to be aggressively talked into running for that seat in Massachusetts. She was opposed to doing it. She's an academic. She's a college professor.
Well, she certainly didn't support Dennis, who was the only appropriate candidate for, if you're a progressive.
Except if he can't win the election, is he an appropriate candidate?
Well, he was running neck and neck there for a while until the...
no, I mean if he can't win against the Republican in the general election. That's what all the polling was showing, was that there's no way that Dennis Kucinich could beat that Republican. Or at least that's my understanding. I mean, I may be wrong on this. Don, I'm sorry, we're hitting a break here, but thank you for your call. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And, that conversation, there's a little edge of circular firing squad to it that I'm very uncomfortable with. But I suppose it's important to discuss. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Legacy of Secrecy, The Long Shadow of the JFK Assassination by Lamar Waldron and me. The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, triggered cover-ups by officials, this is from the introduction, by the way, that continue to negatively impact American politics, life, and foreign policy. Legacy of Secrecy details those cover-ups and hidden investigations, many for the first time, including the reasons they were carried out under such intense secrecy. Most were spawned by John and Robert Kennedy's top-secret 1963 plan to stage a coup against Fidel Castro. a plan so highly classified that it only started to be exposed in 2005 and is finally revealed in this book. Their own confessions now show that three mafia bosses, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, and Johnny Roselli, were behind JFK's assassination. They used parts of the secret coup plan to kill JFK in a way that forced Attorney General Robert Kennedy, President Lyndon B. Johnson, excuse me, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, and high CIA official Richard Helms to withhold critical information not only from the public and the press, but also from each other and sometimes their own investigators. It's important to keep in mind that JFK was murdered just a year after the tense nuclear standoff during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The main goals of U.S. officials were to prevent a nuclear confrontation with the Soviets and to protect JFK's ally high up in the Cuban government, Commander Juan Almeida, head of the Cuban Army in 1963, still listed as Cuba's #3 official today. While U.S. leaders have managed to prevent a confrontation with Russia and preserve a critical ally in the Cuban government, this limited the investigation into JFK's murder, allowing the three mafia chiefs and their associates to remain free. As a result, the long shadow of secrecy surrounding both JFK's murder and the coup plan set the stage for the murder of Martin Luther King, ultimately driving 2 presidents from office and bringing about the murders of 5 congressional witnesses in the mid-1970s. Legacy of secrecy breaks important new ground in key areas, detailing for the first time Louisiana godfather Carlos Marcello's clear confession to ordering JFK's assassination. Marcello's criminal empire ranged from Dallas to Memphis, and previously secret files at the National Archives have shown that he made this confession in 1985 to an FBI informant ruled credible by a federal judge as part of a secret FBI undercover sting operation named Camtex. Exposed here for the first time, Camtex yielded Marcello's admission that he'd met Lee Harvey Oswald and set Jack Ruby up in business in Dallas. The operation also generated hundreds of hours of heretofore secret prison audio tapes of Marcello discussing his crimes, recorded using the FBI informant's bugged transistor radio. Yet the FBI and Justice Department withheld most of that information from the public and Congress for years until its revelation in this book. Carlos Marcello wasn't the only mob boss who confessed his involvement in JFK's murder to a trusted associate. Legacy also uncovers important new information about Marcello's partners in JFK's assassination, Tampa godfather Santos Trafficante and Johnny Roselli, the Chicago Mafia's man in Las Vegas and Hollywood. Shortly before their deaths, both mobsters admitted their roles in JFK's murder to their attorneys. 2 of their associates with documented ties to the secret JFK Almeida coup plan likewise confessed. Using exclusive new information supported by FBI files apparently withheld from Congress, this book names 2 of the Georgia men who paid James Earl Ray to kill the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, white supremacist Joseph Miltier and Hugh R. Spake. Miltier, who had been involved in Marcello's murder of JFK, was part of a small clique of racists in Atlanta who used Marcello to broker the contract to murder Dr. King. We document James Earl Ray's ties to Marcello's heroin smuggling operation and long overlooked evidence in FBI files linking Ray to Marcello's associate, Johnny Roselli. Finally, this book explains why Ray, while fleeing to Canada the day after killing Dr. King in Memphis, made a 400-plus mile detour south to Atlanta, where he contacted Spake to get help from Miltier. In 1979, the last congressional committee to investigate the murders of JFK and Dr. King, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, concluded, quote, that Trafficante, like Marcello, had the motive, means, and opportunity to assassinate President Kennedy, end of quote from the congressional report. The HSCA had been created in the wake of Roselli's sensational murder, but the HSCA was unable to establish direct evidence of Marcello's complicity. And the same was true for Trafficante and Roselli, because the CIA, FBI, and other federal agencies withheld so many relevant files. The HSCA, headed by civil rights figure Louis Stokes, also concluded there was a likelihood of conspiracy in the assassination of Dr. King and that financial gain was James Earl Ray's primary motivation. But they were unable to determine who had paid Ray or how the conspiracy had worked because the FBI and other agencies had hid critical files. With the help of more than 24 associates of John and Robert Kennedy, backed up by thousands of recently released documents at the National Archives, many of which are quoted here for the first time, Legacy tells the full story denied to Congress and the American people, legacy of secrecy. Back to Talk Media for the sane among us. Thom Hartmann here with you, and I'm really happy to have on the air with us Mary Ann and Pamela Aden, the Aden sisters. They are the co-editors and publishers of the Aden Forecast, ADEN Forecast, and directors of Aden Research, AdenForecast.com. You can tweet them at the Aden Forecast. In the interest of full transparency, they are a sponsor of this program, an advertiser with our program, but that's not why they're on. I have subscribed to their newsletter for, geez, it seems like 2 decades. It's been a lot of years. And I just find it personally very, very useful in guiding my investment decisions. And I wanted to share their expertise with you. So Pamela and Mary Ann, thank you for joining us. Hello?
Yes, we're happy to be with you.
Oh, great, great. Okay, we can hear you. Your newsletter, you've been talking about how, you know, for a while you had us in bonds, and then you said, okay, the bond market is going south. And your last newsletter was talking about how the pressures seem to indicate that the stock market's still in a bull market, but you're not recommending that people buy or hold stocks outside of a couple that, you know, we've held for a long time. And that the currency markets, you were expecting the dollar to collapse. It's been going up, but that the long-term trend is for the dollar to go down. And so get into things like exchange-traded funds for the euro and things like that. Do I have that right?
Yes. Well, you've got it right. And we are bullish. And actually, the last few days here, the stock market's looking really good. But we're still a little, cautious on it because, as you know, this bull market's been going on for 9 years, and it's getting a little long in the tooth, but it's still looking good, and we think that'll probably continue as long as the economy holds up and interest rates don't go up too high.
Right. And go ahead.
But what is that we're like in the 8th and the 9th inning of a game. We took a lot of profits in December, and we kept some, and we still think the bull market's still alive, and as long as it's alive, we're going to stay with a smaller position.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, my concern, frankly, and I'm basically almost entirely in cash right now, is that the instability, and I don't want to make this political, but frankly, the world situation and what's going on in the White House tends toward instability, and you combine that with the fact that, as you said, we're in the 9th inning of the game. This is the second longest bull market, I think, in the history of the United States, and
right.
and so the end is probably visible, and it could just be some small thing like Syria and Iran, Iran and Israel going to war, in the Golan Heights, or something going south with the North Korea deal, or even Mueller coming out and saying, okay, here it is, we're going to indict so-and-so for such and such, and boom, it all falls off the edge of the earth. Are those legitimate concerns? Or, I mean, the market's been able to shrug most of that stuff off up until the last few months.
Yes, those are definitely legitimate concerns. And it's almost like the market is going to keep going up until finally, the pin drops, or like they say,
the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Exactly. Yeah. Something could trigger it. Could be the investigation. It could be anything. It could be interest rates going a little too high and suddenly everyone gets nervous. But it looks like at some point, and it probably could happen in the next few months or so, maybe a little longer, but at some point something could really hit the market hard, and it could come down quite sharply.
Yeah, and meanwhile, can't forget that short-term rates have risen quite a bit, even though they came from 0 to 2% almost. They're still rising and catching up. They're still historically low, so that's why probably we aren't feeling much of the rise in interest rates yet. And also, we've been having inflation pressures. Yeah. So with inflation, even though it's not a big deal, it is growing for the first time in quite a while. Deflationary pressures are definitely yesterday's paper, in other words. And so this is what we're facing now, is how gradual the rates will rise or not, and how far will inflation go. In the meantime, the growth in the resource sector and in the precious metals has been slowly coming, not so slow in the resource, been coming around for the last 2 years, and we've called that the turnaround year. And we feel like this year, 2018, is going to be the year that's going to start showing us a little more that turnaround is indeed underway.
Yeah. Now, my understanding of how inflation works is that there are two things that can drive inflation. The first is actual intentional government policy, where the government decides that they're going to reduce the value of their currency, which is what inflation is, at a particular rate over a particular period of time. And what the Fed is asserting is that a 2% reduction every year in the value of the dollar, or 2% inflation, let's say, is a good and acceptable thing. It lets the government pay off debts with lower amounts of money, and everything gets real predictable around that. As opposed to, for example, Robert Mugabe just printing gobs of money in Zimbabwe and ending up with 10,000% inflation. But the other thing that can drive it is if core commodities, essential commodities in an economy, things that the economy can't run without, explode in price. And in the 70s, this was oil as a result of the two Arab oil embargoes in the late 60s, early 70s, or whenever they were back then. And we saw inflation go, we saw the Fed raising interest rates up to 13, 14% in order to try to tamp down that inflation that was the result of this massive rise in oil prices. A, reality check my understanding of inflation, and B, if that's the case, we're seeing oil go past $70 a barrel. If there's war in the Middle East, if the Iran-Syria-Israel situation continues to melt down, it seems to me that we could be seeing oil easily above $100 a barrel, which would then drive inflationary pressures, which would then cause the Fed to say, wait a minute, we need to slow down the economy to slow down inflation and thus raise interest rates. And that raise in interest rates would be the absolute thing that would kneecap the stock market. Is that logical chain making sense?
It sure is. It's making a lot of sense, and that's pretty much how we feel. That's how we feel about, like, already the resource sector has risen quite a bit. And even if you compare, say, the copper price or any of the resource, even rare earths, compared to even the average, like the S&P 500, it's actually outperformed it on a year-by-year basis, meaning last year. And so, I mean, it is growing. And another thing that's very interesting that's happening is that many times in the past, stock market and the precious metals or resource sector rise together, like we've seen this year. They do rise together. It's just that one is like at the end of a wonderful bull market, and the other one's just starting one. And that could go on for a couple of years. And we feel that's kind of what's been happening now in the last 2 years, that we're going to start seeing more growth in this area, resource and precious metals, and less growth in the stock market.
Right. So you
expect not just a regular market, but definitely they're switching places.
Yeah, and in an inflationary environment, being in things like oil or gold is actually a good thing because that's what's driving the inflation. So the bottom line question, because we're hitting the end of our segment here, for somebody who's listening or watching right now and might have, $10,000 to invest or $100,000 to invest, or even $2,000 to invest, as a young person starting out or somebody who's just decided to start setting money aside. What's your advice at this particular moment in time? We're talking to Marianne and Pamela Aden, the Aden sisters, co-editors and publishers of the Aden Forecast. ADENforecast.com is the website.
Well, actually, my daughter asked me the same thing. She's 30 years old, and she was asking, she has a little savings. She goes, now I'm ready to invest. So this is a great question. And this year, actually, in fact, this summer, is probably going to be one of the good times to be able to pick up some good value in selected resource and precious metals. So we would think like a selective gold share, a selective resource share, and gold itself, and say even a rare earth. We would go in that. Say even though Freeport McMoran fell a lot, it still has good potential. In fact, it's at a good value right this moment. And so we would GLD, as if you want a gold ETF, or buy some physical gold and keep it. And also, you can't forget about silver. Has been very underpriced. And if both of them start rising, we'd probably get a lot more value and more gains with silver than we would with gold. as it looks right now.
But this is not, I mean, I remember, when you told us to get into the market, when you told us to get out of the market, and you told us to get in and out of bonds. And back, 15 years ago, you said it's time to get into gold. And I got into, Louise and I got into gold. And it went from as I recall, when we got in, it was $230 an ounce. It went to over $1,000 an ounce. So you're suggesting that currency ETF, gold, silver, and resource, basically, precious metals, rare earths, copper, things like that, or even oil, if you can stomach that.
Energy too, like we feel that oil is actually kind of wanting to lead this whole group up higher, and we think oil has more room to rise further. And in fact, a lot of the resource sector, the energy shares are just catching up to the oil price rise.
So for people who are interested in investing in a way that is socially responsible, would the solar and the wind power industries be the equivalent of basically oil? It's an energy sector buy?
Well, I think eventually that could be very true. And in fact, you're looking at other things too that are energy related. But for the moment, it's all about oil.
Yeah.
And I think the others will probably catch up.
Very, very interesting. Mary Ann and Pamela Aden, they are the co-editors and publishers of the... whoa! What did I hit the button? And yeah. We'll thank you very much, Mary Ann and Pamela. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Great talking to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and welcome back. We're, although I'm not hearing myself in my ear.
I'm hearing you.
There we go. Okay, you're hearing me. Great. Welcome back. That was fascinating. That was very interesting. Bob in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Bob, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, I just wanted to make a comment on the gun debate. It seems like one of the most common arguments you always hear about the Second Amendment is it's there to ensure that we don't get a government, tyrannical government that destroys our democracy. Aside the fact that by giving us the right to vote in the Constitution, it's hard for me to accept that then the Founding Fathers would come up with the Second Amendment and say, oh yeah, just in case you don't like who you elected, you can shoot us.
Yeah, that was never even part of the discussion, much less part of the thinking.
But my main point is, there are democracies around the world, several of them, where individuals don't have the right to own personal assault weapons.
Mm-hmm.
But there are no democracies around the world where people don't have the right to vote. So when you consider which party, A, while they're defending the Second Amendment, B, is trying to take away or limit, at least limit, if not totally take away people's right to vote.
Right.
So basically, making the argument that the Second Amendment is to keep government in check is a folly. You should be putting your effort into making sure people have the right to vote, not that they have the right to carry a weapon.
Oh, I agree. But see, there's nobody who makes money off voting. Even the voting machine companies, while they theoretically make money off voting, because these are government contracts, they're basically making the money whether anybody shows up to vote or not. Whereas if people buy guns, there's people who make a lot of money off that. And so all the fear-mongering...
Well, you know where there's a lot of money? Heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine.
Not money that big investors can get behind. Not money that can be used to spiff Republican members of Congress. That has to be a legal industry. And that's why, you know, the weapons industry is so insanely profitable. It's a very, very wealthy industry, and they're passing money off to their shills in Congress like there's no tomorrow.
Exactly. So the money is basically the biggest problem. Another point, though, is, well, I probably kept you on too long already. I could go on all day about this. But the one point they talk about is if you even allow the government to restrict the number of rounds you can have in a rifle, you know, the argument over 30 and 100 round magazines. The argument that if you allow that to happen, the next step is the government's going to take away all your guns.
That's crazy.
Well,
that's like saying that if the
because
FDA
you
regulates
it at all, you'd understand that for decades, the government has limited the amount of rounds you can have in your shotgun when you're hunting ducks or waterfowl.
Right.
And that never led to them taking away people's guns,
no.
shotguns or any other gun.
Well, and they've limited fully automatic weapons, and they've limited machine guns, and they've limited Gatling guns and all these other things. Yeah, it's a nonsense argument. Bob, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's the place where smart people get their news, the Thom Hartmann Program. Speaking of the news, let's check in with Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. Luke can be followed on Twitter at The Courier. He is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News based out of the UN in New York. Luke, what's going on in the world today?
Hey, Tom. Well, I've been watching this and rewatching and practicing my French, watching the French foreign minister give an interview today in which he basically said that the 3 European countries as involved in the Iranian nuclear deal that hope to keep that agreement together are preparing kind of a legal strategy at the European Union, or are going to very soon, to try and sort of insulate them from the unraveling of this deal. I think this is kind of a long shot plan, and they wish they had more protections here against what Trump has done. But it was a very palpable frustration on the part of these countries who feel like they are basically having their own foreign policy decisions taken away from them. Right. The French finance minister saying we don't want to be a vassal of the United States. The United States has all of this sort of economic sovereignty where they, or at least Trump, can use any tool he wants in the book, whether or not it's consistent with international trade law, in order to just enforce his policies. And here we are kind of getting screwed. We want to keep staying in this deal, and we're probably going to be shut out of it.
Right.
He said,
can I define a couple parameters here for people who may not be following this with the level of detail that you and I do? When the European Union as an aggregate is a larger economy than the United States. China is the second largest economy in the world. And so China now has they just opened this week a rail line from the Mongolian area to Iran. And they've got this long train filled with some kind of agricultural product. I forget what bean it is or whatever, that's on its way to Iran right now as we speak. So China and Iran are getting closer and closer in doing trade. And China was a member of this. It was a party to this deal. And the EU, France, Germany, and what was it? The UK was the third? Or was it the EU that was the third?
The EU was sort of helping to oversee things, but you're right, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom.
And the UK. So those three countries, their businesses inside those countries, French companies, German companies, British companies, have been doing business with Iran for a year or so now, or a couple of years now, as a result of the deal that Obama negotiated. And Trump is saying, we can't stop you from doing business with Iran, but we can punish you for doing business with Iran, even though we're not doing business with Iran, and it's not American companies that are doing business with Iran. But if you want your German company to have any interaction whatsoever with an American bank, for example, in facilitating these deals, or the American stock market, then forget it. You're out of luck. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, Luke, but therefore, these European countries are saying, the United States isn't even a party to our relationships with Iran, to our business deals with Iran, our company's business deals with Iran, and yet they're asserting that they can stop us from doing business with Iran. That is screwed up. We don't want to play.
Yeah, I think you've got that right. I mean, and we're talking about major companies here that in almost any other administration, I think you'd see exemptions granted. You'd see some concern expressed by people like Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, saying, look, we get it. Like, Airbus, is sending over all these planes. Like, well, we'll cut them a deal. Or Danone, the food conglomerate. Like, you've been building, I think they built like a milk factory in Iran. I mean, these are capital-intensive projects that these multinational firms have engaged in with Iran. They're not just sort of, tepidly wading in. These have been, the Iranian market is a giant one that a lot of these European companies, Sanofi, the big pharmaceutical company, has also, been working with Iran. And the French finance minister today saying, look, we talked to Mnuchin. We asked him, please, give us some relief here. And Mnuchin hasn't telegraphed what he's going to do. I mean, and the administration so far has been really kind of coy about setting out just how tough it's going to be on our allies. And I would say it's possible we do get exemptions. Bear in mind the European Union had another 30-day exemption, I guess, taking us for a few more weeks now on the steel and aluminum tariffs. So they've been sort of successful so far in dodging, some of the most punishing economic moves by the president. But the fact that we haven't even signaled any sort of, winked at our allies and said, look, we get it, help us out here, say a few things, complain about the Iranian missiles, complain about the support in Yemen, but at the end of the day, we'll help your companies out. We haven't even offered our allies that level of economic certainty, and I think that's justifiably causing a lot of consternation.
Yeah, remarkable. What else is up, Luke?
I will just say we had a pretty interesting announcement because we've been watching this really sort of escalating situation in Syria, where Israel launched these strikes on Wednesday night. They said it was a sort of preemptive, necessary strike because troops belonging to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, basically in Syria, were preparing some sort of attack on Israel. And what we've now seen after a meeting between Benjamin Netanyahu and President Vladimir Putin is the Russian government saying they're not going to send these S-300 advanced surface-to-air missile systems to Syria. That's what they threatened to do and said they were going to do after the U.S. struck at those chemical weapons sites. And now they seem to be backing off. It's a very interesting dynamic. We even got a report today in the Times of Israel that, Russia knew Israel was going to launch these major strikes on the Iranian sort of entities or Iranian-backed forces that are within Syria, and Russia phoned up the Iranians and warned them. And the Iranians basically said, we're concerned about this too. And I think what we're seeing, and this is something I predicted, and this doesn't take a foreign policy genius to diagnose it, is that the Iranian government of Rouhani wants moderation. He doesn't want, these Iranian-backed groups to be engaging in bad behavior right now because it bolsters the argument the Israelis want to make that Iran can't be trusted, the nuclear deal is an unwise thing. But the attacks occurred anyways. These troops fired into Israel. And, of course, you're not surprisingly seeing the U.S. and Israel saying, look, this is just evidence of the, militarism Iran is sowing all around the Mideast. So, again, when we say Iran, we should be very careful if we're talking about the sort of political leadership at this moment or the Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is actively trying to undermine the Iranian president and probably bring the Iran deal to sort of an untimely, premature end. So the forces, the reactions here are quite complex.
Yeah, let's remember Rouhani was the moderate that Ronald Reagan worked with and that he hoped someday would lead Iran. And, it's just amazing when you consider all this stuff. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Good talking with you. Yeah, we'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the organic wine company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
We're reading today from the American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson. He wrote the book 40 years ago. Recently, I went through, Dan and I actually went through, I wrote a foreword and an afterword to it and did some substantial editing on the book. And it's something you need to read. This is from the introduction, which I wrote. It is rare when a book about our early republic is relevant 40 years after it was originally published. It is rarer still when that book provides insight into national problems we refuse to solve 2 centuries later. You are therefore holding in your hands or reading on your pad or computer one of the most important books you will ever encounter. Here is why. Unlike other histories of this era, this book is written from a revolutionary perspective, much like Jefferson's generation viewed the world. The American Revolution of 1800 was not just about an election. It was about the life and death struggle for power between democratic-republican principles and oligarchic plutocratic values based on corruption. In short, this book, by implication, is about the identical crisis America faces today. The author's unique analysis is based on the idea of faction controlling party and how both undermine constitutional government. In an age where modern parties and the factions that control them have paralyzed our government, this book validates the politics of the founders. In still another contribution, the book demonstrates how preserving revolutionary ideas within our culture depends on understanding the classical tradition. The ability to recognize a demagogue is rooted deeply in the role Caesar played in destroying the Republic of ancient Rome. That fear of a Caesar inspired Jefferson and others to organize citizens against the Federalists, thereby completely contradicting the political rules of their time. This book, above all, presents a profoundly positive view of Jefferson and his creativity in the midst of crisis. It celebrates his gift 24 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence and proves he never abandoned his principles or his revolutionary vision for America's future. Ironically, it's become a cliche in political and economic circles that while we love Thomas Jefferson, we live in a country largely run by Alexander Hamilton's policies and John Adams's politics. This may have been more true of the roughly 200 years before the contemporary free trade era, beginning in the 1970s under Richard Nixon and exploding in the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Alexander Hamilton must be rolling over in his grave. Nevertheless, we have become a mercantilist nation dominated by banks and big industries as Hamilton envisioned. It is true that there were huge differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, particularly in their visions for the future of America and its economy, and those divisions tend to dominate interpretations of our political discussion when we reference the era of our first few presidents. But a much larger and more dramatic battle of worldviews played out in the late 1790s between President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, leading directly to what is arguably the most transformational presidential election in the history of the United States, the election of 1800. In other books and places, both Dan Sisson and I have written at some length about the differences between these two men and their respective visions of America. Adams relished throwing newspapers editors in prison and demanded that when he and his wife visited a town, the local militia come out to fire their cannons in salute of him and shout, "God save President Adams." Jefferson was so horrified by Adams's Alien and Sedition Acts that he left town the day they were signed into law, and as president often wore simple homespun garments. He was known to answer the front door of the White House in his bathrobe, and more than one visitor mistook him for a servant. As president, Jefferson literally acted out his egalitarian visions of America. In my book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America and What We Can Do to Stop It, I described Jefferson's concern over aristocracy in American politics. On October 28, 1813, in a letter to his old rival John Adams, Jefferson commented on his distrust of America's growing wealthy elite, naming in particular the Senate, which was not then democratically elected by the people. Referring to the, quote, cabal in the Senate of the United States, end quote, Jefferson wrote, "You, John Adams, think it best to put the pseudo-aristoi into a separate chamber of legislation, the Senate, where they may be hindered from doing their mischief by their coordinate branches, and where also they may be a protection to wealth against the agrarian and plundering enterprises of the majority of the people." Then Jefferson countered in the letter, writing, "I do not believe them, the Senate, necessary to protect the wealthy, because enough of them will find their way into every branch of the legislation to protect themselves." Instead, Jefferson wrote, "I think the best remedy is exactly that provided by all our constitutions, to leave to the citizens the free election. In general, they will elect the really good and wise. In some instances, wealth may corrupt and birth blind them, but not in sufficient degree to endanger society." And in a final warning about the largely Federalist cabal in the Senate, and these would be the conservatives of their time, Jefferson wrote, quote, "The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provision should be made to prevent its ascendancy. I think that to give them power in order to prevent them from doing mischief is arming them for it, and increasing instead of remedying the evil." In a 1786 letter to George Washington, Jefferson gave his most explicit warning about this threat of a military allied with the plutocracy within, and advocated for unwavering vigilance against it. Quote, "Though the day may be at some distance, beyond the reach of our lives perhaps, yet it will certainly come, when a single fiber left of this institution will produce an hereditary aristocracy which will change the form of our governments from the best to the worst in the world." For the crash.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This is, there's some interesting news here. This first one is about Eric Schneiderman, the New York Attorney General, who has basically bailed, and in the wake of allegations from several women that he engaged in basically sexual violence against them, and choking, slapping, hitting, cursing, stuff like that, after drinking. We have not heard Schneiderman's side of this, although he denies all these charges, but you know, it looks pretty bad. But now it's getting weird. Peter Gleason is an attorney in Mahopac, New York. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right. Mopac, New York, however you say it. And he's written a letter to Judge Kimba Wood, from the Southern District of New York, who is overseeing the whole Michael Cohen investigation, saying that back in 2013, he was contacted by two women about a year apart who had these allegations about Eric Schneiderman. And he advised them against going to the DA's office in Manhattan, saying that, you know, he won't investigate political corruption, and instead said you should call, well, he called this reporter, Stephen Dunleavy, and Dunleavy said you should talk about this with Donald Trump. And sure enough, Michael Cohen called this guy, this lawyer in upstate New York, called him, and or wherever it is in New York, and said, thank you for the information, or words to that effect. And now he's petitioning the judge, basically, to not allow that communication to go public if Michael Cohen's papers get published, is my understanding of it. And there's an article about this. There's several links to this on my Twitter feed right now. And there's an article about it over at lawandcrime.com titled, "Now We Might Know What Trump Meant in Cryptic 2013 Schneiderman Tweet." Because back in 2013, Donald Trump tweeted, "Weiner is gone, Spitzer is gone. Next will be lightweight Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. Is he a crook? Wait and see. Worse than Spitzer or Weiner." So has Trump had this in his back pocket all these years, and just when Schneiderman starts closing in on the Trump organization and their crime connections, he pulls it out and blows him up? Or was it just a total coincidence? I have no idea, but I think this whole thing is fascinating. Michael Avenatti, meanwhile, just tweeted out, more to come. You know, he's just coming right out and basically threatening these guys. There's big stuff coming. Americans for Tax Fairness just sent out a newsletter. If you're not on their list, it's americansfortaxfairness.org, and you can sign up for their mailing list. And they say that tonight or today, when Trump gives his speech on pharmaceuticals, it's going to be tough talk, but there's going to be, well, in fact, he's going to be doing it in a few minutes. There's going to be nothing there. And then they go through the list. 5 of the 10 big pharma companies could save more than $6.3 billion in taxes in this year, 2018 alone, because of the GOP tax scam. The pharma Big 10 will save $76 billion in taxes on their offshore profits alone. Only 2 of the pharma Big 10, Pfizer and Merck, have announced any quantifiable sharing of tax savings with existing employees through bonuses, wage hikes, or fringe benefit improvements. None of the other 7 corporations have announced plans to share their tax cut wealth with their employees. Pharma's Big 10 CEOs received total compensation in 2017 that ranged from 94 to 452 times what their average workers got. The CEO of Johnson & Johnson made 452 times what his average worker makes. And none of the pharma Big 10 have announced any plans to use their tax savings to reduce prescription drug prices. And, of course, Trump is not going to suggest that Medicare should be able to negotiate prices. It is very, very strange stuff, you know, what's going on. Finally, cutting this, Jared Bernstein, who was Joe Biden's economist in the White House. In fact, I met with him in the White House during the Obama administration. Jared Bernstein, great guy. And Hannah Catch, writing in the Washington Post today about Mother's Day, he said, this is what the Republicans have planned for Mother's Day for low-income mothers. House Republicans have proposed cutting more than $17 billion from the food stamp program, which helps struggling families put food on the table. SNAP reduces poverty and food insecurity, and it promotes families' long-term health and well-being. This proposal could cut more than 1 million families' SNAP benefits. The House is expected to vote on it next week. The Trump administration has also targeted Medicaid, which serves nearly 40 million women. After Congress failed to pass sweeping cuts to Medicaid last year, the administration has started letting states deeply cut their Medicaid programs through policies that take coverage away from adults who aren't able to meet work requirements. Down in Louisiana, for example, you're about to see 30,000 elderly people thrown out of nursing homes because the Republicans in that state want to cut Medicaid. The administration is also sabotaging the private insurance market, which will make it more difficult and more costly for women to find comprehensive health coverage. The Trump administration recently unveiled legislation that would raise rents by an average of 44% on more than 4 million low-income households with rental assistance, 3/4 of which are headed by women. I mean, this is the Republicans for Mother's Day are trying to kneecap mothers. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Amazing. I've got a little more news for you. We'll share a little later on in the program as time goes on. Tony in Fort Worth, Texas, listening to us on Sirius XM. Hey, Tony, what's on your mind today?
Great show.
Thank you, Tony.
I figured out, not really figured out, but I purchased a handgun not too long ago, and it was brand new, and I was looking through it and the instructions and everything, and I noticed something very interesting. It's a card from the NRA that congratulates you on buying this certain brand of handgun, and in exchange, you're given a complimentary 1-year subscription to the membership to the NRA.
Oh,
and
that's
I
interesting.
thought, okay, this was very
So this is how they get their 5 million members?
I'm sorry?
How many of those 5 million members are comps, are complimentary memberships?
That's what I was saying, because I've heard a lot about how the NRA is so big and so powerful, and then I'm looking at this invitation, and I'm thinking, okay, this is how it's done.
Yeah. I mean, Planned Parenthood has 20 million members, but they're actually all dues-paying members. The NRA, who knows? They don't publish that information. Apparently, there's a good reason why they don't publish it.
So what I was thinking of taking your approach, even though my wife and we're both against the NRA, but I'm thinking, okay, this is my perfect chance here for the next year to, I guess, I don't know, I would say lobby or complain to the NRA about everything that they're for that I'm against.
Well, not only that, if you write a letter to the editor of the local newspaper, or you blog or whatever, and in ways that might challenge the NRA, you can add, as a NRA member in good standing, I have to disagree with the NRA or whatever. I mean, it adds some cred to your argument, and a gun owner.
Exactly. Like, why are they against better background checks? Why are they against this? And I'm looking, okay, this could be it now that you've got. And then when you go to the NRA website, it has National Rifle Association, and then I'm not sure if it's funded by the certain brand of handgun, or it's I guess it is owned. But and I'm thinking, okay, this is just entirely too scary.
Yeah. I'm sure that's a cross-promotion deal between that handgun manufacturer, or the retailer rather, who sold you the handgun, the handgun manufacturer, and the NRA. So the retailer basically, unless you registered your gun and your warranty with the manufacturer. Did you do that, Tony?
No, like I said, this invitation is actually.
Oh, it's in the box with the gun?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, so this is the manufacturer, which is who the NRA really represents, is doing that. Tony, I got to run, but thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Anything Goes Friday. Back with more of your calls right after this. Rich in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Oh, thank you, Tom. I wanted to bring to attention, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when the document from Senator Dianne Feinstein was released, she's chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, back in 2014. The document that was released in December of 2014, Committee Study of Central Intelligence Agency's Detention and Interrogation Program, where we learned about James Mitchell's and Bruce Jesson's deconstructing of the SEER training, Survive, Evade, Resist, Escape. That document was available all over Capitol Hill, and that was 2014, President Obama. But it has been recalled, and I haven't heard that it was re-released. I heard that the copies were all hoovered up and are now in no one's office. And the point of bringing this forward as an important criticism is that as this Senate confirmation hearing has been going on for Agent Haspel, no one has had access to that document to inform them with expert opinion of the study about this situation and how to craft a hard question that should be, backed up with this kind of resource, as Haspel is just sitting there with a smirk on her face, deflecting.
Well, that's interesting. I had no idea. So this is the report that laid out the damage that was done to U.S. intelligence by our torturing people, if I recall correctly. Is that right?
That's my recollection.
Yeah. And
I got the number for it so that folks can specifically identify it. It's Senate Report, I was told, Senate Report 113-288. It was the 113th Congress.
Have you called Feinstein's office and asked if they have a copy?
I called Feinstein's office and said, what the fudge, and what are we going to do?
Right.
And the person said, the senator worked very hard on that. And I said, and do remember that the agency broke into her computers as that thing was being created, and nobody was adequate outrage about having been cyber attacked by our own intelligence.
I had forgotten that. You're absolutely right. The CIA cracked her computer illegally.
Well, it's a mess.
And was never held to account for it, to the best of my knowledge.
And let me offer this as a perspective real quick, please, and that is all of this happened in the previous administration. This is before Trump landed. Imagine how emboldened all of those bad actors are now, and you see people coming out of the woodwork to make statements about torture works, and by golly, I'd have it in a heartbeat. And
right.
You know,
Cheney is back. Yeah.
There's a heartbeat that exists in order to imprison it.
Yeah.
And that is Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney is a frickin' war criminal, and he belongs in a cell.
I agree. Rich, thanks for the call. I'll have to learn a little more about this, but that sounds ominous. I appreciate the call. We'll be back. So instead of saying we're going to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices with the big pharmaceutical companies because they have this enormous purchasing power, Trump is instead saying we want the drug companies to raise their prices on foreign countries so that they will presumably lower their prices here. But of course, they're not going to lower their prices here. And they can't raise their prices in foreign countries because those countries negotiate prices with them, which if we had half a brain we would do, but we don't because all that money that is given to the Republicans by the pharmaceutical industry tends to destroy their brains. So here we go. Jody in Lolo, Montana. Hey, Jody, what's up?
Oh, just a minute. Let me take it off speak.
Thank you, and thanks for listening to us on SiriusXM.
I got a notice that said I needed to update some information on a charge card I have.
Mm-hmm.
And they proceeded to ask me questions, and I was answering them. And she came to one of the questions was, and she kept on saying, the government is requiring us to do this. And she asked me what my citizenship was. And I said, I'm not going to answer that. And she says, well, then you're going to have a red mark on there, and the government requires us to ask you that. Then she went on, and she asked me, and how do you pay your bill? Social Security, inheritance, are you employed? And I said, I'm not going to answer that either. I said, because I'm not asking for the money to be, like if I have $1,000, I'm not asking it, I'm not sure what you'd call that, where I'm going to have my allowance, I guess, added, upped. And I said, I already answered all those questions when I got this card back in 2000.
Right.
And she said, well, then you're going to have a red mark on there.
Jody, a couple quick questions. This is the kind of conversation that very often happens when you've got a scam artist who's trying to get enough personal information from you that they can do identity theft. Are you sure that this was your insurance?
But I called the number on the back of my card.
Oh, really?
I called the number on the back of my card, yes. And when when they sent me an email, I thought, oh, this is a scam. So I called the number on the back of my card. And she said, and then I said, the number is wrong. It doesn't match my number. And she said, they're doing that because they're trying, not to let scammers see. And I went, oh. So then she was asking me all those questions. And so I called my senator from Montana, Senator Tester, and they're looking into it. But this is Bank of America.
Right.
And I know several people who have accounts through Bank of America, and nobody else has been asked so far. And they were kind of threatening. She kept on saying the government is making us ask. And she told me at the end, if I don't answer the questions, they will cancel my card. And my question is I get a lot of things that, a petition to sign for, something on liberal stuff. I get a lot of stuff. And I signed a lot of petitions. And I'm wondering if I was singled out. The whole thing was weird, and I was just curious if you had heard anything about it, because everybody I tell says, oh, that's a scam.
Yeah.
And I called the number on the back of the card, and it wasn't a scam.
This sounds
I
totally
even got
bizarre.
on my online account, and it's on there. And I have red marks.
That's totally bizarre, Jody. That's totally bizarre. I don't know where to begin with this, other than who do we have? Are there any members of Congress who are on the banking committee, Sean, that we know? Let me look into this, Jody. Sean and I will poke around and see if we can find some legislator who's involved in oversight of our banks, and find out what's going on.
I just thought it was really weird.
Yeah, I've also got in the back of my head. I'm not certain of this, but my recollection is that much of the stock of Bank of America has been purchased by foreign companies or foreign entities. But that shouldn't change things. I just don't know what's going on, Jody, and maybe somebody who's listening will know and can call in and fill us in. Jody, I got to move along.
That's why I was wondering if somebody else had a call or anything like
that.
Yeah,
if anybody did, give us a call and let us know. Jody, thank you for the call. Casey in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Casey, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing, buddy?
Good. What's on your mind?
Good. I got a question for you. The whole thing with Pelosi, thank you, with Pelosi, saying she wants to get back in the seat again. And are the Democrats trying to throw this election too? I mean, have they not learned their lesson from the last election? And I'm really tired of this whole, Russia did not lose the election for the Democrats. The Democrats lost their own election when they rigged the primaries, and I'm sick of it. I'm sick of, for 2 years now, Russian collusion, and the Democrats have no plan whatsoever, and they're banking our futures on the stupid Russian collusion.
Right. I don't see that happening, Casey. And like I said earlier, these circular firing squad calls, I wish Arthur would not put them up. There's no way to respond to what you're saying that is constructive. Anita, what's on your mind? Anita in San Antonio, what's on your mind, Anita?
Hey, Tom, happy Friday.
Thank you. Back at you.
Yeah, that call from Jody was really creepy. I've been watching The Handmaid's Tale, and everything starts to creep me out now.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've noticed that a couple of times last week, you guys were talking about 2020 and re-election and how Donald Trump, I guess you were talking about how there was a good possibility that he was going to win. And I just don't think that we should be talking like that. I don't think it helps. I think it's counterproductive. I mean, when you listen to the Parkland kids, they don't talk about losing. They say things like, "We're going to vote you out."
Yeah. There's actually a motivation strategy here, Anita. I'm on Sherrod Brown's list, and 3-4 times a week I'm getting fundraising appeals from him, and they're all based on, oh my God, the guy that we're going up against just got another $1 billion, from so and so. They're actually pointing out to people that the other side might win. This is what the Republicans did in 2016. Clinton's going to win if we don't get out there, and it actually stimulates people to vote. So respectfully, I disagree with you, and thank you for the call, Anita. But I'm going to continue to say, we are seeing Donald Trump's approval numbers go up steadily, and it's because he's been appropriating Democratic talking points, particularly on trade. But we're watching his numbers go up, and it's also because he's patting himself on the back a lot in public, something that previous Democrats rarely did. And we'll see if it changes the dynamic of presidential politics beyond him.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But the reality is, no matter how much we may dislike it, we can't just stick our fingers in our ears and cover our eyes and go, nah, nah, nah. That, there's a real threat right now. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Seize the Time, the story of the Black Panther Party and Huey P. Newton by Bobby Seale. This is from page 85, a subchapter titled Huey Backs the Pigs Down. And there are a few words in here that I'll be filling in, as it were. They're walking, he says, one day as we were walking out of the office, I guess we'd been there about a month or so, a pig passed by. He saw us coming out of the office with shotguns and pistols on our sides.
About 6 or 7 of us came out of the office there in the daytime, and we looked at the pig as he passed by, and he jumped on his radio because he saw us coming out of the office with these pieces and stuff. We had just finished field stripping weapons, learning about 00 buckshot, learning about the 9mm and the .45, and having a political education session. We had a .45 and a .357 Magnum in the group and a couple of M1s. We had 3 or 4 shotguns by then. We bought up guns like a son of a bitch then. The pig went down 2 blocks and turned around, came back up the other side of the street. They were building rapid transit, BART, right down from Grove Street there, and we went up the other side of the boulevard and came back. We readily assessed that the pigs were ready to see what the F was happening, that this pig had radioed in, and he was running it down, how he had, quote, seen some N-words come out of a place here with some guns and blop, blop, de bloop, etc., come out of this office with guns and stuff. He was radioing into other pigs to help get him. Huey had his father's car that day, and he goes through that whole thing. So anyhow, the police pull him over, and Huey got in the car, and the pig came up to the window. You have any driver's license? So Huey rolled the window down. That wasn't more than a 3 or 4 inch crack in the window. Huey handed his license out the window. Is this your true name, the pig said? And Huey said, yes, that's my true name, Huey P. Newton. Is this your true address, 841 47th Street? And Huey said, yep, that's my true address, 841 47th Street. And what are you doing with the guns? And Huey said, what are you doing with your gun? This particular pig decided he wasn't going to argue, so he went back and got his little writing pad there where they fill out S-word. Your true name is Huey P. Newton? Huey said, that's right. The pig wrote it down. Your true address is 841 47th Street? Huey said, that's right. The pig then looked at his license. What's your phone number? And Huey said, 5, and stopped and wouldn't say anything else. And the pig said, 5 what? And this is when all the S-word between the pig and the party and the pigs began. Huey said, the 5th Amendment. You ever heard of it? Don't you know about the constitutional right of a person not to testify against himself? 5, I don't have to give you anything but my identification, name, and address, so therefore I don't even want to talk to you. You can leave my car and leave me alone. I don't even want to hear you. What do you mean, the pig said. And Huey said, just what I said. The constitutional right of any man is that he doesn't have to testify against himself. And Huey had a big M1 sitting to his right with his hand on it. I had this 9mm sitting beside me, and Huey had this M1 at his side. Huey was driving. 4 other brothers were in the back seat. One of them was Bobby Hutton. They were being quiet because Huey told them to be quiet. And the pig is going crazy. He's by himself, and Huey's got all these black N-words in the car going for the MFer. Meanwhile, while the pig is trying to get bad, 3 cars drove up behind us and 1 in the front. Some more were in the driveway. Blop, 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 de blue. Then another car came in front of us. A pig jumped out of the car, walked up to our car, and said through the crack in the window with a hoggish voice trying to sound intimidating, what's going on here? And Huey said, the same basic procedures that are supposed to go on. Huey rolled the window down another 5 or 6 inches. The pigs were looking at the guns in the car. Can I see that pistol there? One of the pigs said. No, you can't see it, Huey told him. I was beginning to get skeptical about what was happening because he pointed to my 9mm pistol. Huey was on probation, and if they thought that this was Huey's pistol, I didn't know this law stuff the way Huey knew it, so I moved the pistol over beside me real close. It had been lying in the middle of the seat. I said, no, you can't see it. Huey said, no, you can't see the pistol, nor this, pointing to his rifle. And you don't want to look, and I don't want you to look at it. You don't have to look at it. Is that your pistol? He asked Huey. And I said, no, it's not his pistol, it's my pistol. I said that because I was thinking the man's going to jump on Huey because he already told me about the probation law. If he gets caught with a pistol, he's burned. But if he gets caught with a rifle, the man can't mess with him because his probation officer told him he can carry a rifle or shotgun and he couldn't stop him. The pig said, can I see it or not? So Huey said to me, I'll talk. And then he said to the pig, no, you can't see the pistol. Get away from the car. We don't want you around the car, and that's all there is to it. Well, I can ask him if I can see his pistol or not, the pig says. So I says, well, you can't see my pistol. The MFers tried to get indignant. They were blabbing and oinking to each other about who in the hell we thought we were, and Constitution my ass, they're just turning it around. Then the pig said to Huey, who the hell do you think you are? Look, damn it, Huey said. He opened the car door. This is where Huey got mad. I mean, you have to imagine this N-word. He got mad because these dogs were going to carry on and they were bracing up like they were bad. Huey didn't go for this at all. Huey got very mad. He opened up the door saying, who the hell do you think you are? In the first place, this man, pointing at the pig, came up here and asked me for my license like he was citing me for a ticket or observation of some kind. This police officer is supposed to be carrying out his duty, and here you come talking about our guns? Huey put his hand around his M1 rifle and continued, we have a constitutional right to carry the guns, and anyway, I don't want to hear it. The pigs backed up a couple of steps, and Huey was coming out of the car. Huey had his hand back in the car getting his M1, and you know, if you've ever seen Huey, he gets growly but articulate. He came out of the car with his M1. Huey knows this law so well that he wouldn't have had the one M1 loaded inside the car. So he came out of the car, he dropped a round into the chamber right away. Clack, clop. Who do you think you all are anyway? Huey said to the pigs. And the pigs were all on the sidewalk harassing all the brothers and sisters who gathered around. You move on down the street, said the pig. Huey started interrupting. You don't have to move down the street. Don't go anywhere. These pigs can't keep you from observing. You have a right to observe an officer carrying out his duty. And these pigs, they listened to all this S-word, and it goes on from there. It's a great story. Seize the Time by Bobby Seale. Tariro Mezuzua is writing for the New York Times. Ms. Mezuzua is a staff editor at the opinion section of the paper, and she writes in yesterday's New York Times, napping. Add that to the list of activities, driving, walking, laughing, waiting for someone in Starbucks, checking out of an Airbnb, that puts you at risk of being interrogated by the police if you are black. And she tells the story about this young African-American woman who was a graduate student. She's working on her master's degree at Yale University. She's an author, she's a respected academic, and she's black. And she fell asleep in her dorm's common room, right, in the public space that everybody shares in the dormitory. Black woman asleep on the couch. Oh my God. And some white woman calls the police. The police show up and she shows them her ID and they say, well, we're not sure this is actually you. And, you know, she recorded this thing on her cell phone. It runs like 4 minutes long. And Yale, of course, is very embarrassed by this. But this is just, it's like white people use the police as weapons against people of color. Routinely. And, you know, it's just shockingly wrong. I don't know how to say it beyond that. Cliff in Canyon Country, California. Hey, Cliff, what's on your mind today?
Morning, Tom. Hey, in regards to that Schneiderman story and Trump you were just talking about,
yeah.
Malcolm Nance says sometimes coincidences take a lot of planning.
Yeah, there you go. Well said.
And one quick question before I get to my topic about that assisted suicide you were talking about yesterday. Do you have to be a resident of the state that allows you to do that? Do you have to be like an Oregon resident to have that process done? Or?
I don't know. If you do have to be a resident, and it's not just Oregon, there's like 6 or 7 states now, including Vermont and D.C. and Washington State. If you do have to be a resident of the state, then it's not that difficult or that time-consuming in most states to establish residency. You just, you know, rent an apartment and, you know, move the utilities over and declare yourself a resident.
Right, get a utility bill and you're in.
Yeah, yeah, maybe change your driver's license, but yeah.
Okay, great. Yesterday you informed us listeners about glyphosate from Roundup being in almost every food we consume.
Right.
Informative but very disturbing. Hopefully eating organic helps to diminish the amounts. But that story reminded me of the situation with DuPont and that chemical C8.
Which Mike Papantoni is all over that. Yeah.
Exactly. I'm sure you're real knowledgeable about this.
Yeah, they poured that into that river in New York or wherever it was.
Several waterways got contaminated.
What is this music I'm hearing? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
It's not coming from me. Anyways, the article said estimated 98% of all Americans have the C8 in our bloodstream.
Right.
And doesn't it parallel the tobacco industry? Because the scientists at DuPont discovered how toxic this was long, long ago, and the executives were only concerned about corporate profits.
Yeah.
But the one bright spot I read was that I think they're allowing class action cases and even individual cases against DuPont. And I was wondering if we can get to that one day with Monsanto, they'll eventually be in this position where we're going to be able to have class action lawsuits against them for their glyphosate contamination of the
Hard to say. These chemical companies have a lot of legislative protection in that once you regulate an industry, you also essentially are protecting it. As long as they operate within the regulations, you can't go after them. So, which is one of the reasons why these big chemical companies ask for regulation. So I'm skeptical. But you know, it takes a change in public opinion, and then that requires informing the public. But yeah, spot on, Cliff. It's serious stuff. Thanks a lot for the call. By the way, Arthur just handed me this story. A white woman There's another one, right? This is from the Huffington Post. A white woman called the police on a black family at Lake Mira in Oakland, California last month, just while they were setting up for a day at the park. Their crime was barbecuing in one of the park's designated barbecue zones. It was, yeah, with using a charcoal grill, the wrong kind of barbecue. It was filmed by a witness named Michelle Snyder, who confronted the woman for calling the police on the family. In recent weeks, a number of incidents around the U.S. have involved white people calling the police on black people and other people of color for such activities as sitting at Starbucks, staying at an Airbnb, taking a nap, and participating in a college campus tour. In that case, that was Native Americans who were so badly trashed. Amazing, amazing stuff. Valerie in Chicago. Hey, Valerie, thanks for listening to WCPT. It says here you're going to do a political talk show?
Yes, we started April 1st, and you are my inspiration. I've been listening to you for, many years. I think I called in a couple of years ago to talk about something, but I usually just listen in the car on WCPT in Chicago.
So when's your show?
So we are on Q4. It's internet radio. It's QUE.4.org.
Okay.
And we're on every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. to about 11:45, and we are talking politics and music. And I generally, I'm older than my co-host, so I usually come up with more history and sort of context. And I do a rant every week about stuff that's bothering me, and we talk about. He's more of a current activist kind of person, but
right.
It's a lot of fun, and you always say get out there and get active and do more this year than you did last year. And I got so frustrated on Facebook arguing with other progressives, just determined to do the circular firing squad, as you said.
Yeah.
All through the Obama, presidency, and then the Hillary campaign, and what happened afterward with Trump. And so I did a progressive summit, I called it, and I had two rules. One was no arguing, because you know how we lefties love to fight about the details. And the other was you can get on the microphone and you can do a 5-minute presentation, but then I want you to invite people to join you at your table and, actually face-to-face connect with other people and talk to them and get each other's contact information and, just try to do some coalition building.
Mm-hmm. That's marvelous stuff. And you did this in Chicago, Valerie?
I'm sorry?
You did this in Chicago?
In Chicago, yeah.
Yeah. That is great. Louise and I have been kicking around the idea of my traveling around the country and doing things, and doing little mini progressive summits is a variation on something we've been thinking about, bringing local activists in and sharing the stage with them and all that kind of stuff. It sounds fascinating. So Q4.org is the website where people can find your show.
Right, is the website, and you can listen to us live. We're going to do some archiving also, and you can also find us on the TuneIn app and on iTunes.
Right.
It's called the Val Leventhal Show. That's my name. And I didn't want to call it my name because I thought, it's not all about me, but I turned out to be the main host, so it just seemed less confusing.
Yeah, people like to know who they're talking to. Valerie, I need to move along, but thank you for the call, and good luck. Good luck, and I'm glad to give you a plug. Jeremy in Glendora, California. Hey, Jeremy, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I was just calling because about the whole Mueller thing, and, of course, it's on our brains. We're hearing it 24/7, but a couple of things. One, I wondered if you had ever had William Binney on your program, and if you've ever read that article in The Nation that they did regarding the whole birth of what birthed the whole Russia investigation, the hacking of the DNC, and where Bill Binney and The Nation came down.
No, I'm not familiar with that at all, Jeremy.
I would encourage you to look into that and possibly have him on your program. I think it's quite a mind blower, and coming from The Nation, not like the Weekly Standard or somebody like that.
Sure.
It'll have you take another.
How do you spell
look
his
at
last
this whole
name?
Thing. Pardon me?
How do you spell his last name?
Binney, as in yes. William Binney. And
Right.
if you look up like The Nation, William Binney, you'll definitely find the article.
Yeah.
But the question I wanted to ask you was this. With regard to where we're at right now, the Wall Street Journal just published like a column in the last 24 hours about just like Trump essentially going nuclear with declassifying stuff. And really, we have so much hearsay floating around, just like what you said about that attorney general from New York, and that the person said, go tell Trump, and now all of a sudden this bad stuff is happening to him because Trump may have dropped a dime on him. You don't know that, and I don't know. That's a lot of hearsay. And so same with the investigation. So it's like, why don't we declassify as much as possible and let the chips fall where they're going to fall? Because there's an enormous amount of hearsay going on both sides.
Well, a fair amount of it is not hearsay. I mean, when you actually have, dozens of people indicted and a half a dozen people pleading guilty, that's not hearsay.
Yeah, but not indicted.
And the story
in relation to
no, I get
the
that,
election.
Jeremy. And the story that I was sharing earlier was this lawyer who says that he introduced these women to Trump actually has written to Judge Wood, and this is on the record. This is a public document. Has written to Judge Wood asking that those documents be basically carved out of all the stuff that Michael Cohen, that was grabbed when they got to his office. But I'm totally with you on declassifying everything. Although you don't want to blow up the investigation. I mean, this is sort of Mike Pence's position. Well, let's just wrap all this up. And now you got Devin Nunes. Who's the guy who gave you the inside information so we can destroy him, right? I think that we need to wait for Mr. Mueller to present his evidence and lay out his position. David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Well, it was your birthday Monday, and I promised to do your astrology again.
Okay, we have a minute, so make it quick, please.
Okay, well, I'm going to cut part of it then. You're born in the Chinese year of the rabbit. The rabbit is born under the sign of virtue. At your positive best, you don't like to lie, cheat, or steal. At your negative worst, you will lie, cheat, and steal. So you've lied in your life, but you're not one of those people who liked it. It's not who you wanted to be. The rabbit is also nimble of body, nimble of mind. Michael Jordan's a rabbit, nimble body. Albert Einstein was a double rabbit, nimble of mind. His nimble mind leapt someplace no one had ever gone to before. You have that too. Your month is a snake, wisdom. That's the same as Louise's year. Great sign of compatibility, and you're both wise. She's Pisces, you're water, you're earth. That's a great sign of Western astrology compatibility. So you guys are great for each other.
I agree.
And you didn't need me to tell you that. The most fascinating aspect of your astrology to me is your Mercury. Mercury rules transportation and communication because they're the same thing. Transportation is the movement of people and objects from one place to another. Communication, the movement of thoughts, words, and ideas from one place to another. Your Mercury is ruled by Aries, so even though you're a Taurus, you communicate more like an Aries. Aries is the conquering leader. Negative Aries will cheat to win, but you're the virtuous rabbit who doesn't cheat. So you, Thom Hartmann, were born to conquer through honest communication, and here you are, a political talk show host, conquering through honest communication. You are exactly where you're supposed to be with exactly who you're supposed to be with.
Well, thank you very much, David. Now, a whole bunch of people are scratching their heads going, okay, did he just invent all that because he listens to Tom's show, or is this real astrology, David?
I'll call you back next week and explain very briefly what astrology is. It's just the study of patterns in nature.
Okay. Thank you very much. David, good talking with you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
I know it's going to jack my spam email load hugely, but I've always been fascinated by astrology. We'll be back. Welcome back. Jeff in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Tom, thanks for taking my call. Always an honor, and belated happy birthday to you.
Thank you. What's up?
Well, I called to discuss the Democrats and the one possible silver lining the election of Orange Chump, as I call him, has given us. And as you know, Tom, going back to Bill Clinton and continuing through President Obama, the Democrats have always been wiped out in midterm elections when we've had the White House. And had Hillary not squandered her opportunity running against the biggest grifter in the history of the world, it stands to reason we'd be looking at even more losses this fall for the Democrats in Congress. So
it's hard
Hillary's
to say, Jeff.
loss, Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I think a lot of that losing in the midterms has been from the centrist positions.
I think there's a much larger dynamic here at work that we need to acknowledge, and that and the subtext of that, the reason I'm mentioning this is that it's really not Hillary's fault, and that much larger dynamic was that in 2008, America really wanted consequential change. We were sliding into another Great Depression. We wanted a change agent. Barack Obama ran as the guy of hope and change, and he became president, and he was stymied by the Republicans at every turn. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, most of the proposals that he put forward were very tepid and very kind of, normal way of doing things. And people wanted friggin' change. They wanted Franklin Roosevelt. They wanted somebody who was going to disrupt the system. They wanted Teddy Roosevelt, and they didn't get it. And so that desire for change was still there in 2016, and very real there in 2016, and that just wasn't Hillary Clinton. And Donald Trump figured that out, with the help of Cambridge Analytica, who focus grouped and tested and told him, use these phrases: drain the swamp, build the wall, and lock her up. Those were the three phrases that they told him to use, and he was skeptical about all three of them, but he tried them on the campaign trail, and they worked because people wanted change. And Trump now is saying, hey, I'm bringing you change. I'm not sure that people are going to be all that excited about the change he's bringing, but it seems to, over the short term anyway, be working for him. But anyhow, Jeff, forgive my interruption. Continue your rant.
Yeah, Tom. Well, with Hillary, she did represent the status quo because she really didn't, I don't think, feel the pain of the people.
Well, for whatever reason. But I don't want to turn this into a trash Hillary thing. What's your point, Jeff?
I'm not trying to trash her. I'm just saying, I agree. I'm agreeing with you. And with her loss, though, we've been forced into a reckoning and given an opportunity. And as Ralph Nader told Ari Melber yesterday, it's time for the Democratic Party to stop looking for scapegoats and to look at ourselves in the mirror and ask, from the city and state level all the way to Capitol Hill, it's high time. We've been losing a lot of seats, and it's high time for us to begin rebuilding the Democratic Party from the ground up, allowing for the emergence of these new leaders, and either from Me Too, Never Again, Black Lives Matter, etc.
Yeah.
And once and for all, get rid of the greediest and most cowardly people amongst us that have taken over this country, whether you're talking domestically with the NRA and Big Pharma, or internationally with these neocon chicken hawks who are once again narrowing in on another war in the Middle East.
Jeff, I agree with all of that. I didn't see the segment with Ari Melber and Ralph Nader, but it sounds solid. Jeff, thanks for the call. Welcome back. Leslie in Davenport, Iowa. You have some information about the Bank of America calling this credit card holder up who called into our show and asking her if she was a citizen and how she was getting the money that she was using to pay off her credit card?
Yes, sir. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I am well.
April 25th, I got a notice, an urgent one from Bank of America saying, please contact us to update your personal information. The ending numbers on the credit card from the email was wrong. I assumed it was a scam. I called Bank of America, and they said, no, we need to update your records. And they asked me the exact same questions. How do I pay my bill? You know, what source of funds I pay my bill, if I was a United States citizen or resident. And they were pretty insistent that I needed to complete all of it in order to keep using my credit card.
Wow. Now, did they reference any particular legislation or changes? Or
No, but they did say that the government was requiring this.
Huh.
So, yeah.
You know, is there anything unusual about you, Leslie? I mean, are you very, very poor or very, very wealthy, or do you run tens of thousands of dollars through your credit card every month?
No. We're just an average family. We have a balance. We don't pay it off every month, so we have a balance. But we're in good standing. There was no reason for it, and they said that if you want your credit card still available to you, you have to answer these questions. So.
That's amazing. Well,
yeah.
I need to learn more about this.
I just wanted to back up the lady.
Yeah.
That's correct. And I think I see on your Facebook page several people have chimed in, and it was Bank of America.
I wonder if it's just that bank, and if they've got some some scheme going here that doesn't have to do with the government, but they're trying to fine tune, to make sure that they're, it's deadbeat alert, right? They're looking for people who might be problematic in advance, and the real question that they wanted to ask was, how do you pay your bill, right? And if they don't get the answer they want, then they pull your card, and if they do get the answer they want, all the other answers are irrelevant because that was the only reason they were asking. Although that's just speculation on my part. I really have no idea, but. Fascinating. So there's a conversation on our Facebook page about it. That's good to know, Leslie. I will see. Let me see what I can learn, and we can talk about it next week. Leslie, thanks so much for the call. I appreciate it.
Very good.
Thank you, and thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Yeah, good talking with you. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to quickly bring awareness to and share my outrage and frustration about the Trump administration's decision to cut the carbon monitoring system.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even get to that story today. It's only a $10 million system. It provides all the information necessary for the Paris Accord compliance and to know what's going on with carbon in the atmosphere, and the Trump administration is killing it.
That is correct. Yeah, it costs $10 million a year to track carbon and methane, track sources and sinks for carbon, made the high-resolution models of the planet's flow of carbon. Really cool program, and the website appeared to be a lot more robust than it is now. So it's something that they're actively trying to do away with. And I think having that information now is more critical than ever, due to the rapidly changing climate that we're all dealing with.
Yeah, and this is entirely because a group of petro-billionaires, oil industry, coal industry, natural gas industry billionaires, and multinational corporations have made a deal with the devil, with the Republican Party, or the Republican Party has made a deal with the devil, however you want to characterize this, we'll pretend that there's no such thing as global warming in exchange for all your money. Marty, thanks for the call. Yeah, it is outrageous, and thanks for bringing that in. I did want to get to that story today. I still have a half a dozen I didn't get to. One of them, by the way, I'll talk about it on Monday. Britain has now apologized to somebody that they rendered to Libya to be tortured. When do we apologize? Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today, all this week. We will be back on Monday with more great show. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires all of us, and that includes you. So get out there, get active, tag. You're it. Your turn. We'll see you on Monday. Oh, and happy Mother's Day. Yes, happy Mother's Day this week.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.